They said she destroyed him. That the moment Elara Whitcombe stepped into Duke Blackthorne's life, everything he'd built began to crumble. A powerful man reduced to whispers and pity. All because of her. But what if the woman they blamed was never the weakness? What if she was the weapon they never saw coming? This is the story of a bride abandoned, a duke who gambled everything, and the night that proved some falls are just preludes to flight. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The chapel bells didn't ring. That should have been Elara's first warning, but she'd been too busy trying to breathe in a corset laced tight enough to crack ribs. The ivory silk of her wedding gown pooled around her feet like spilled cream, heavy with seed pearls that caught the afternoon light filtering through stained glass. 200 guests filled the pews behind her, lords and ladies in their finest, merchants who'd paid fortunes for the privilege of witnessing a Whitcombe marry into minor nobility, distant relatives who'd crawled out of the woodwork the moment her dowry was announced. She stood at the altar alone. "He'll come," her Aunt Philippa had whispered 15 minutes ago, adjusting Elara's veil with hands that shook just slightly. "Lord Ashford is simply, fashionably late." 30 minutes ago, the priest had cleared his throat and suggested they give the groom a few more moments. 45 minutes ago, Elara had still believed this day would end with her as Lady Ashford. Now, as the hour mark approached and the whispers behind her grew from murmurs to barely concealed conversation, she knew. The knowing settled in her stomach like a stone dropped in deep water, cold and sinking and utterly final. Marcus Ashford wasn't coming. Perhaps, the priest tried again, his voice careful in the way people spoke around the dying. "We should send someone to Lord Ashford's residence. A carriage accident. A misunderstanding of the time. He's not coming." Elara's voice came out steadier than she felt. She'd been practicing that steadiness her whole life. The measured tones of a woman raised to be ornamental, useful, marriageable. Never loud, never too much, never, ever inconvenient. The priest's face crumpled with pity, which somehow made it worse. Behind her, someone laughed. Just a brief sound, quickly stifled, but it ricocheted through the chapel like a gunshot. Then another. And another. The dam broke. Not into roaring laughter, because these were refined people, but into that particularly cruel form of aristocratic amusement that dressed itself up as scandalized concern. "The poor dear," someone stage whispered. "Who could have seen this coming?" Everyone. Everyone had seen it coming except her. Elara forced herself to turn, to face the crowd. She catalogued them with the same detached precision she'd learned studying botanical illustrations. Each species of cruelty carefully noted. There was Lady Morrison, fanning herself dramatically, while her eyes gleamed with the kind of joy people found in others' disasters. The Ashford family sat 3 rows back, conspicuously absent of Marcus himself, but present enough to be seen publicly distancing themselves from whatever disaster this had become. Her own mother sat pale and furious in the front row, her father beside her looking like he'd aged a decade in an hour. The dowry. Elara's thoughts clicked into place with nauseating clarity. They'd already given him the dowry. £20,000, paid in advance as a gesture of good faith between families. Marcus Ashford had taken their money, their trust, and the chapel doors slammed open. Every head turned. Elara's heart lurched stupidly, hope flaring for just a second before logic crushed it. It wouldn't be Marcus. It couldn't be Marcus. Men who left you at the altar didn't make dramatic returns. The man who strode down the aisle wasn't Marcus Ashford. He was taller, broader, dressed in black that seemed to drink in the light rather than reflect it. His coat was perfectly tailored but not ostentatious, his cravat tied with the kind of casual precision that suggested a man who didn't need to try. Dark hair, darker eyes, and a face that would have been handsome if it weren't so cold. He moved like violence contained in formal wear, every step precise, controlled, dangerous. The whispers changed flavor. Shock replaced amusement. Duke Blackthorne had just walked into her failed wedding. Elara had never met the man, but everyone knew of him. The Blackthorne Duchy controlled shipping routes, mining operations, and enough agricultural land to feed a small nation. Old power, old money, and a reputation for ruthlessness that made other nobles nervous. He didn't attend social functions, didn't play political games, didn't, as far as anyone knew, Give a damn about the people currently gaping at him like he'd materialized from thin air. He stopped in front of Elara. Up close, he was even more unsettling. There was something off about him, not in his appearance, which was admittedly striking, but in the way he looked at her, like she was a chess piece whose value he was calculating. Like this moment, this humiliation, was somehow part of a game she didn't know she was playing. Miss Whitcombe. His voice was low, rough around the edges. Northern accent, she noted distantly. Old Durham families, probably. You seem to have misplaced your groom. Behind them, someone gasped at the sheer audacity of stating the obvious. Elara lifted her chin. If she was going to be humiliated, she'd at least maintain some dignity while it happened. An astute observation, Your Grace. Something flickered in those dark eyes. Amusement? Approval? It vanished too quickly to tell. I have a proposal, he said, and the chapel went silent enough to hear a pin drop. Marry me instead. The words didn't make sense. Elara stared at him, certain she'd misheard, that the stress had finally broken something in her mind and she was hallucinating. I'm sorry, what? You need a husband. I need a wife. The logistics are already arranged. He gestured vaguely at the chapel, the priest, the assembled witnesses. Seems inefficient to waste the opportunity. This is insane, Elara breathed. It's practical. He said it like that explained everything. You can refuse, of course. Walk out of here unwed, your dowry gone, your reputation in tatters. The gossip will be unkind. I imagine your family's standing will suffer considerably. Or I marry a stranger who just happened to be conveniently nearby when I was abandoned. I wasn't nearby. I came specifically for this. Blackthorne's expression didn't change. I knew Ashford wouldn't show. I knew your family had already paid him. I knew you'd be here, alone, with 200 witnesses to your humiliation, and I knew you'd be desperate enough to consider an alternative. The calculation in that statement was breathtaking. Elara felt like she'd been dropped into ice water, shock giving way to a different kind of clarity. You planned this. I seized an opportunity. He tilted his head slightly, studying her. There's a difference. Ashford's a gambling addict who's been running from creditors for months. Your father's advisors failed to investigate him properly. I merely waited for the inevitable. And decided to… what? Rescue me? The word tasted bitter. Hardly. Something sharp entered his tone. I decided to acquire a wife under circumstances that would make her particularly motivated to be useful. You're educated, well-connected, and now thoroughly indebted to me. It's an advantageous arrangement. Elara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, crushing silk and pearls between her fingers. You're out of your mind. Probably, he agreed. But I'm also your best option. Your only option, really. So I'll ask once more, Miss Whitcombe. Will you marry me? She should refuse. Should tell this arrogant, manipulative bastard exactly where he could shove his advantageous arrangement. Should walk out with whatever dignity she could salvage and face whatever came next with her head high. But her father's face kept swimming into her vision, the way he'd looked when the debt collectors had started circling last year, the relief when the Ashford match had been secured. The money was gone. Marcus had taken it and run. If she refused Blackthorne, her family would be ruined, not just socially, though that would be bad enough, financially, completely. Why? The question came out rawer than she intended. Why would you want a wife you had to trap into marrying you? For the first time, Blackthorne's expression shifted into something that might have been genuine. Because I need someone who'll fight back when cornered. Someone smart enough to see the trap, but practical enough to step into it anyway. Someone who won't bore me to death within a month. How romantic. I'm not offering romance, Miss Whitcombe. I'm offering survival. Yours and your family's. He extended a hand. Take it or leave it. Elara looked at his hand, gloved, steady, belonging to a man who'd orchestrated her humiliation just to make her desperate enough to accept his terms. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to spit in his face and walk away. She took his hand, his fingers closed around hers, firm and warm even through the glove. A wise choice. A necessary one, Elara corrected, her voice ice. Don't mistake necessity for wisdom. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Noted. The priest looked like he'd swallowed a frog. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. The banns haven't been posted. The ceremony was arranged for Lord Ashford. Then change the name. Blackthorne didn't look away from Elara. I have a special license. The legal requirements are met. Proceed. And because he was a duke and dukes didn't receive the word no very often, the priest proceeded. The ceremony was a blur. Elara heard herself speak the words, felt Blackthorne's hands as he placed a ring on her finger. Heavy gold, too large, clearly not meant for her. It would need to be resized. The absurdity of worrying about ring sizing while her entire life collapsed and rebuilt itself in the span of minutes almost made her laugh. I now pronounce you husband and wife. No kiss. Blackthorne simply nodded once, released her hand, and turned to face the crowd of stunned nobles. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for bearing witness. The wedding breakfast will proceed as planned at Whitcombe House. My wife and I will arrive shortly. My wife. The words sounded strange in his accent, formal and distant, like he was discussing property acquisition. Which, Elara supposed, he was. They walked back down the aisle together. Elara kept her spine straight, her chin up, her expression carefully blank. She'd learned that mask early, the art of hiding everything that mattered behind practiced composure. But inside, she was screaming. The carriage waiting outside wasn't her family's. It bore the Blackthorne crest, a thorn bush wrapped around a crown, rendered in black and silver. Of course he'd brought his own carriage. Of course he'd planned every detail. A footman helped her up. The dress made it awkward, all that silk and those damned pearls catching on everything. Blackthorne climbed in after her with considerably more grace, settling into the seat across from her, rather than beside her. The door closed. The carriage lurched into motion. They sat in silence. Elara studied her new husband, and wasn't that a thought that made her stomach turn, with the same cataloging instinct that had served her through the chapel. Mid-30s, probably. Signs of sun damage on his hands suggested he didn't spend all his time indoors playing aristocrat. A scar on his left temple, small but noticeable. Wedding ring already on his finger, also too large, also clearly not made for this occasion. You wear a wedding band, she said, breaking the silence because the alternative was sitting in her own spiraling thoughts. I had it made this morning. He didn't elaborate. How efficient. I find it pays to be prepared. Elara laughed, a sharp sound with no humor in it. You orchestrated my humiliation, proposed marriage before 200 witnesses, and had our wedding rings made in advance. But please, do tell me more about the value of preparation. I didn't orchestrate your humiliation. Ashford did that himself. I simply knew it was coming and positioned myself to benefit from it. Blackthorne's tone remained infuriatingly level. There's a difference between creating a disaster and being ready when one strikes. Semantics. Strategy. He leaned back, apparently unbothered by her anger. You can hate me if it helps. Most people do. But you should understand what you've married into before we arrive at your family's house, and you have to perform being a grateful bride. I'm not performing anything. They can think whatever they want. They will anyway. The question is whether you give them ammunition or control the narrative. Blackthorne pulled off his gloves with methodical precision. Here's what they're already saying. The desperate Whitcombe girl was so humiliated she accepted the first offer that came along. That I took pity on you. That you're damaged goods I'm settling for because I'm too difficult to find a proper match. Each word landed like a slap. Elara's nails dug into her palms. You seem to know a lot about what people are saying. I make it my business to know. He met her eyes directly. And I'm telling you this because we're going to change that story, starting today. Change it how? By making them believe this was my choice, not my charity, that I saw something in you worth pursuing, worth interrupting another man's wedding for, that you didn't settle, you upgraded. Elara stared at him. You're insane. I'm practical. There's a difference. He said it like he was explaining basic arithmetic to a child. Your reputation matters because it reflects on mine. If people think I married you out of pity, they'll treat you, and by extension, me, as weak. If they think I wanted you specifically, they'll wonder why. Wonder what they're missing. Wonder if perhaps Elara Blackthorne is more interesting than they initially assumed. It's still a lie. It's strategy, he corrected, and strategy is what keeps you alive in my world. Our world, Elara wanted to say. It's our world now, whether I wanted it or not. But the words stuck in her throat. The carriage slowed. Through the window, she could see her family's townhouse, the place she'd lived her whole life, that she'd left this morning expecting to return to only briefly before moving to the Ashford estate. Instead, she was returning as a different woman entirely. Duchess Blackthorne. The title felt like a costume she hadn't learned to wear yet. "One more thing," Blackthorne said as the footman opened the door. "Your family's debt. The dowry that Ashford took." Elara's chest tightened. "What about it?" "I've covered it. The creditors have been paid. Your father's accounts are settled." He said it casually, like he was discussing the weather. "Consider it a wedding gift." She couldn't breathe. "Why would you?" "Because it's mine to manage now. Your family's financial stability affects my interests. Besides," he stood, offering his hand to help her down, "I need you focused on other matters, not drowning in debt anxiety." Elara didn't take his hand immediately. She studied his face, looking for the angle, the trap, the inevitable catch. There was always a catch. "What other matters?" she asked quietly. Blackthorne smiled then, a real smile, sharp and cold and somehow worse than his blank expression. "Being my wife, Miss Whitcombe. Or have you not realized yet? This isn't a rescue. It's recruitment." The wedding breakfast was torture disguised as celebration. Elara sat at the head table beside her new husband, smiling until her face ached, while relatives and family friends offered congratulations that barely masked their confusion. Her mother kept shooting her looks that managed to convey both relief and bewilderment. Her father looked like he'd been hit over the head and was still trying to figure out which direction was up. And the guests were having a field day. "Such a surprise," Lady Morrison cooed, gripping Elara's hand with unnecessary force. "And after that unfortunate business with Lord Ashford, how fortunate that his grace was available." Translation: "How desperate were you to accept him?" "Quite fortunate," Elara agreed, her smile never wavering. "Though I confess when I woke this morning, I didn't expect to end the day as a duchess." "None of us did, dear." Lady Morrison's eyes glittered. "But then, his grace has always been unconventional." Translation: "He's strange, and you're probably going to regret this." Blackthorne, to his credit, played his part perfectly. He didn't hover or dote. That would have seemed false. But he stayed close enough to make it clear he was present by choice. When Lord Pemberton made a thinly veiled comment about fortunate timing, Blackthorne simply raised an eyebrow and said, "Fortune favors the prepared, Pemberton. You should try it sometime." The comment landed like a grenade in polite conversation. Pemberton sputtered. The nearby guests pretended to be fascinated by their food. Elara hid her smile behind her wineglass. "You enjoyed that," Blackthorne murmured later, low enough that only she could hear. "I have no idea what you mean." "You smiled. Actual smile, not the performing one. I saw the difference." He cut into his beef with surgical precision. "Pemberton's a pompous ass. He deserved it. He's also your peer. Aren't you supposed to maintain diplomatic relations with pompous asses?" "I maintain profitable relations with useful people. Pemberton is neither useful nor profitable. He's just well-connected enough to be annoying." Blackthorne glanced at her sideways. "Speaking of useful people, see the woman in the corner? Gray dress, ruby necklace?" Elara followed his gaze. "Lady Catherine Verne. She runs half the charity organizations in London and gathers more intelligence than the Foreign Office while doing it. Every secret in society passes through her drawing room eventually." He took a sip of wine. "Make friends with her." "Is that an order?" "It's a suggestion. You're free to ignore it, of course. But Lady Catherine could be a powerful ally, and you're going to need allies where we're going." That caught her attention. "Where are we going?" "Blackthorne Hall. My estate. We'll leave tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" The word hit like cold water. Of course they'd leave immediately. Staying in London would just prolong the spectacle. But somehow Elara had imagined she'd have more time. Time to process, to prepare, to say goodbye to the life she'd known. "How long will we be gone?" she asked, proud that her voice stayed steady. "Indefinitely." "I see." She didn't see. She didn't see anything except the ground disappearing beneath her feet. Blackthorne set down his knife and fork with deliberate care. "You're afraid." It wasn't a question. Elara bristled anyway. "I'm adjusting." "You're terrified. It's in your hands. You keep clenching them when you think no one's looking, and your breathing changes when anyone mentions the estate." He spoke clinically, like he was cataloging symptoms. It's understandable. You've been uprooted from everything familiar and thrown into a situation you can't control with a man you don't know and don't trust. The accuracy of that assessment was somehow more unsettling than the situation itself. Are you trying to comfort me because you're terrible at it? I'm being honest. I find it more useful than comfort. He picked up his wine again. But since we're being honest, you should know that Blackthorne Hall isn't like London. The rules are different. The people are harder. And I'm not going to shelter you from any of it. I don't need sheltering. Good. Because I'm not offering it. His eyes were dark, unreadable. What I am offering is this: a chance to prove that you're more than just a woman I had to trap into marriage. A chance to be useful, powerful, even if you're smart enough to seize it. And if I'm not interested in power, then you'll be miserable, because power is the only currency that matters in my world. You can spend the rest of your life being a decorative duchess who smiles at parties and contributes nothing, or you can learn to be dangerous. He said the last word like it was something precious. Your choice. Elara wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't want to be dangerous, didn't want power, just wanted a life that made sense. But the lie stuck in her throat, because the truth was part of her, the part she usually kept locked away, the part that had always been too much, too angry, too hungry for more than what was offered, was listening, was interested, was wondering what it might feel like to stop performing gratitude and start taking what she wanted. I hate you, she said quietly. Blackthorne smiled. I know, hold on to that, you're going to need it. The party dragged on for hours. By the time the last guest departed, Elara's face hurt from smiling, and her feet ached from standing in uncomfortable shoes. Her mother cornered her in the parlor while the servants cleared away the remains of the celebration. Elara. Her mother's voice was tight, controlled. What on earth were you thinking? I was thinking that our family was about to be ruined, and I had exactly one option to prevent it. Elara sank into a chair, not caring how ungraceful it looked. You're welcome, by the way. Her mother flinched. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Mother. Fair would have been Marcus Ashford not being a lying, gambling thief. Fair would have been Father's advisors actually doing their jobs. Fair would have been me having literally any choice in what happened today. Elara pulled off her shoes, flexing her cramped toes. I did what I had to do, just like you've always taught me. I taught you to be practical, yes, but marrying a man you don't know, who has a reputation for being what? Ruthless? Cold? Difficult? Elara laughed tiredly. As opposed to Marcus, who was warm and charming and abandoned me at the altar after stealing our money? Her mother had no answer to that. The Duke settled your father's debts, she said finally. All of them. I know. That's generous. It's strategic. Everything he does is strategic. Elara stared at her wedding ring, too large on her finger, already leaving a faint indent in her skin. He doesn't do anything without a reason. And you're comfortable with that? I'm alive with that. Comfortable is a luxury I don't have anymore. She looked up, meeting her mother's worried gaze. We're leaving for Blackthorne Hall tomorrow. I don't know when I'll be back. Her mother's composure cracked. Elara. All right, I promise. But Mother. She stood, moved to embrace her. I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was this morning. I can't be. That girl expected fairness and got destroyed for it. The woman I'm becoming, she's going to have to be harder, smarter, maybe even dangerous if I want to survive this. You sound like him. Maybe that's not the worst thing. Elara pulled back, studying her mother's face. Maybe dangerous is exactly what I need to be. She slept in her childhood bed one last time, or tried to anyway. Mostly she stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Blackthorne had left shortly after the party ended, citing business that required his attention. He'd return at dawn with his carriage, ready to transport her to her new life. His departure had been brief, formal, and utterly lacking in any pretense of affection. I'll see you in the morning, wife. Looking forward to it, husband. The sarcasm had rolled off him like water off stone. Now, in the dark quiet of her room, Elara let herself feel everything she'd been too busy performing to acknowledge. Fear, anger, grief for the life she'd imagined and lost, resentment toward everyone who'd put her in this position, Marcus, her father's advisors, The society that valued her primarily as a commodity to be traded. And underneath it all, something else. Something uncomfortable and unwelcome. Curiosity. Blackthorne was right about one thing. She did have choices now. Not the one she'd wanted, not the gentle, comfortable life she'd been promised, but real choices, with real consequences. She could be the decorative duchess, smile and nod and fade into irrelevance. Or she could be something else. Something harder. Something that scared the people who'd tried to make her small. The thought shouldn't have been appealing. The fact that it was told her everything about how much today had changed her. Dawn came too quickly. Elara dressed in traveling clothes, practical wool and dark blue, sturdy enough for a long journey. Her trunks had been packed the night before, mostly by her confused lady's maid who kept asking whether she should pack for a brief visit or a permanent move. Permanent, Elara had said, the word tasting strange. Pack everything. Now she stood in the foyer saying goodbye to her parents, while Blackthorne's servants loaded her belongings into an impressive carriage. Her mother hugged her tightly. Her father pressed a handkerchief into her hand, her grandmother's, embroidered with flowers. "To remember," he said gruffly. "I won't forget," she promised. Blackthorne appeared exactly at dawn, as promised. He looked as composed as ever, dressed for travel in dark colors that made him seem carved from shadows. His gaze swept over her once, assessing, before he nodded approval at something she couldn't identify. "Ready?" he asked. "No." "Yes." The carriage was more comfortable than the one from yesterday, built for long journeys rather than short trips across London. Blackthorne settled into his seat with the ease of someone who spent a lot of time traveling. Elara arranged her skirts, trying to find a position that didn't make her feel like she was drowning in fabric. They pulled away from her family's townhouse. Elara watched through the window as the only home she'd ever known grew smaller, then disappeared around a corner, gone, just like everything else. "You'll see them again," Blackthorne said, reading her expression with irritating accuracy. "I'm not keeping you prisoner. Just taking me hundreds of miles away to an estate I've never seen with people I don't know. Also providing you with resources, status, and protection from the scandal that would have destroyed you otherwise. But yes, if you want to frame it negatively, you can." He pulled out a newspaper, apparently content to read rather than engage in conversation. Elara studied him while he was occupied. In daylight, away from the performance of yesterday, he looked tired. There were shadows under his eyes, tension in his jaw. Whatever business had kept him up late clearly hadn't been pleasant. "Why did you really do it?" she asked abruptly. He didn't look up from his paper. "I told you, I needed a wife." "Why me specifically? You could have any woman in London. Younger, prettier, from better families." "You think I want younger or prettier?" Now he did look up, eyebrow raised. "I wanted someone with a brain and a reason to use it. Someone who wouldn't bore me with insipid conversation about fashion and wouldn't swoon when I needed actual work done. You were abandoned at the altar in front of everyone who matters. You're angry, humiliated, and desperate to prove them all wrong. That makes you useful. Stop saying that." "What? Useful? You keep calling me useful like I'm a tool you acquired." Elara's voice shook slightly. "I'm a person. I'm aware. Useful people are always persons. Tools don't have agency, which is precisely what makes you valuable." He folded his newspaper with precise creases. "And before you accuse me of being heartless again, consider this. I'm being honest about what I need from you. How many husbands can say the same? Most would lie, promise love and partnership while treating their wives like decorative furniture. I'm telling you exactly what this is and what I expect. That's a gift, even if it doesn't feel like one. Some gift. Better than pretty lies." His dark eyes held hers. "You strike me as someone who's had enough of those." He wasn't wrong. Marcus had lied beautifully, had promised her romance and adventure and a partnership of equals. Every word had been calculated to make her feel chosen, special, wanted for herself rather than her dowry. At least Blackthorne's honesty was sharp enough to cut cleanly. "Tell me about the estate," she said, changing the subject before she said something she'd regret. "What am I walking into?" "Trouble, mostly." He said it so matter-of-factly that Elara almost laughed. "Blackthorne Hall has been in my family for 6 generations, 10,000 acres, including farmland, mines, and forestry. Approximately 400 people live and work on the estate directly, with thousands more in the surrounding villages depending on our industries. That's substantial. It's a nightmare. He pulled out a different paper, this one covered in what looked like accounts and reports. The agricultural yields have been dropping for 3 years. The mines are producing less than they should. Trade agreements keep falling through. And the staff, he shook his head. Let's just say my household runs on gossip and resentment in equal measure. Sounds delightful. It's reality, and it's what you're going to help me fix. Elara blinked. I'm sorry, what? You're going to help me fix it. That's why I married you, not just to have a wife, but to have a partner who can handle the things I can't be everywhere for at once. He handed her the papers. Start reading. You'll need to understand the basics before we arrive. She took the papers numbly, staring at rows of figures and reports that made her head spin. I don't know anything about managing estates. You know how to read, analyze, and think critically. The rest is just application. He leaned back, watching her. Unless you'd rather spend your days arranging flowers and planning menus, I can find someone else to handle the actual work if you prefer the traditional route. The challenge in his voice was obvious. He was testing her, seeing if she'd rise to it or retreat into comfortable irrelevance. Elara looked down at the papers in her hands. Numbers and percentages and complicated trade agreements that would take hours to properly understand. It was work. Real work. The kind usually reserved for men and estate managers. The kind that mattered. I'll need more information than this, she said, already scanning the first page. Production reports, historical yields, staff records, trade route maps. You'll have everything you need once we arrive. I've had my secretary prepare a complete briefing. Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. Welcome to the real work, Duchess. The title still sounded strange, but for the first time since yesterday, Elara felt something other than fear or anger. She felt interested. The landscape changed as they traveled north. London's dense streets gave way to open countryside, then to rougher terrain, hills and forests and land that looked wild despite centuries of cultivation. They stopped twice to change horses, ate cold meat pies from a basket Blackthorne's servants had packed, and spoke little except when Elara had questions about the reports she was reading. And she had a lot of questions. Why has crop production dropped so sharply in the eastern fields, she asked, pointing to a particularly concerning chart. Soil exhaustion. They've been planting wheat continuously without rotation. That's idiotic. Even I know about crop rotation. My former estate manager apparently didn't, or didn't care. Blackthorne's jaw tightened. He was more interested in keeping costs low than yields sustainable. Former manager? I fired him 6 months ago. Haven't found a replacement worth trusting yet. Elara made a note in the margin. In the mines? This says production is down 30%. Equipment failures mostly. The machinery is old and breaking down faster than we can repair it. Replacing everything would cost a fortune we don't currently have. She looked up sharply. You don't have the money? I have the money. I don't have the liquid capital without pulling it from other investments that are currently more profitable. It's a timing issue. He shifted uncomfortably. The first time she'd seen him look anything other than perfectly composed. The estate has been neglected. My father managed it well, but after he died, things fell apart while I was dealing with other matters. By the time I turned my attention back to Blackthorne Hall, the problems had compounded. What other matters? Keeping the duchy from collapsing entirely? He said it flatly, without emotion. My father left debts I spent 5 years clearing. I had to rebuild our reputation, renegotiate contracts, fight off 3 separate attempts by rival families to seize our holdings. The estate was always going to be the last priority because I had to secure everything else first. Now, he gestured at the papers between them. Now I'm paying for that neglect. Elara studied him with new understanding. The ruthlessness, the calculating precision, the way he approached everything like a strategic problem. It all made sense if he'd spent years fighting to keep his family's legacy from crumbling. So I'm not just a convenient wife, she said slowly. I'm extra hands you desperately need, essentially. He didn't bother denying it. I need someone I can trust to handle parts of this while I'm managing other aspects. Someone who won't steal from me or make decisions based on politics instead of practicality. Someone who has every reason to make this work because their own survival depends on it. You really do think of everything strategically, don't you? It's kept me alive this long." His expression softened slightly, barely perceptible, but there. "For what it's worth, I could have chosen someone easier, someone more compliant who would have asked fewer questions and caused less trouble. I specifically wanted someone difficult. Should I be flattered? Probably not, but it's the truth." He looked out the window at the passing countryside. "We're almost there. Another hour, perhaps." Elara's stomach clenched. An hour until she saw the place that would be her home, her prison, or her kingdom, depending on how she chose to see it. She looked back down at the reports, at the long list of problems that needed solving. It was overwhelming. Impossible, maybe. But also potentially interesting. They crested a hill just as the sun was setting, and Blackthorne Hall appeared below them like something from a Gothic novel. It was huge, a sprawling stone manor that seemed to grow organically from the landscape, all dark granite and sharp angles. Towers rose at odd intervals, windows glinted like watching eyes, and the ground spread in every direction. Forest on one side, carefully manicured gardens on another, and what looked like industrial buildings in the distance where the mines must be. It should have been imposing, intimidating. Instead, Elara felt a strange sense of recognition, like she'd seen this place before in dreams. "What do you think?" Blackthorne asked quietly. "I think it looks like a lot of work." He smiled, a real smile this time, not the cold calculating one. "Good answer." The carriage rolled down toward the estate. Servants were already gathering at the entrance, a small army of people waiting to meet their new duchess. Elara smoothed her traveling dress, checked that her hair was still mostly in place, and tried to remember every lesson about composure and grace she'd ever been taught. "One more thing," Blackthorne said as they approached. "The staff is going to be resistant to you, specifically. They're going to see you as the woman who distracted me from my responsibilities, the scandal that forced me into a hasty marriage, the reason I've been absent from the estate more than usual lately." "Wonderful. Anything else I should know?" "Yes." He caught her hand, the first time he'd touched her voluntarily since the wedding. His grip was firm, almost crushing. "Don't let them see weakness. Not for a second. The moment you show fear or uncertainty, you've lost. These are hard people who respect strength and nothing else. So whatever you're feeling right now, terror, anger, resentment, lock it away. Be the Duchess. Be dangerous." She wanted to pull away, wanted to tell him she wasn't some weapon he could sharpen and deploy. Instead, she squeezed his hand back just as hard and said, "Then let's give them something to fear." The carriage stopped. The footman opened the door, and Elara Blackthorne stepped out to meet her new life. The first servant to curtsy did it wrong. Elara noticed immediately. The angle too shallow, the duration too brief, the eyes that stayed up instead of down. It was technically a greeting, the way a slap was technically contact. The woman was older, maybe 50, with iron gray hair and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile decades ago. "Your Grace," the woman said, her tone absolutely flat. "Welcome to Blackthorne Hall. I am Mrs. Brennan, the head housekeeper." "Thank you, Mrs. Brennan." Elara kept her voice pleasant, aware that every servant lined up behind the housekeeper was watching this exchange like spectators at a prize fight. "I look forward to working with you." Something flickered in Mrs. Brennan's eyes. Amusement? Contempt? It vanished too quickly to tell. "Of course, Your Grace. I've prepared the Duchess's chambers. Your belongings will be brought up shortly." "The Duchess's chambers?" Blackthorne's voice cut in, sharp enough to make several servants flinch. "She'll be in the East Wing, the main ducal suite." Mrs. Brennan's composure cracked slightly. "Your Grace, those rooms haven't been used since your mother. Then it's past time they were opened again." He said it with absolute finality. "See to it immediately." The housekeeper's mouth thinned into a bloodless line. "As you wish." She swept away, taking half the assembled servants with her. The remaining staff continued their greetings. A blur of names and faces Elara knew she'd never remember all at once. The butler, Mr. Graves, who looked appropriately named. The cook, Mrs. Patterson, whose assessment of Elara involved an uncomfortable amount of staring at her midsection. The head groundskeeper, the stablemaster, the lady's maid who'd been assigned to her, a young woman named Anne who looked terrified of everything. By the time the introductions finished, Elara's face hurt from maintaining her pleasant expression, and her feet were screaming from standing in travel-worn shoes on gravel. "Come," Blackthorne said, offering his arm. I'll show you the house. They walked through doors that looked heavy enough to withstand a siege. The entrance hall was cavernous, dark wood paneling, portraits of stern-faced ancestors, and a staircase that split into two curving arms like something from a cathedral. Everything smelled faintly of wood polish and old stone, and something else Elara couldn't identify. Age, maybe. History pressing down like a physical weight. Your mother's rooms, Elara said as they climbed the stairs. Mrs. Brennan seemed upset about opening them. My mother died 12 years ago. Mrs. Brennan has been using the Duchess's quarters as a convenient excuse to maintain control over that entire wing. His jaw tightened. Consider it the first territory you're reclaiming. That's what this is? Territory? Everything is territory. He led her down a hallway lined with more portraits, more dark wood, more reminders that this place had existed long before either of them and would continue long after. Mrs. Brennan has run this household without oversight for years. She's not going to surrender authority gracefully. And you want me to fight her for it? I want you to win. He stopped in front of an ornate double door. This is your domain now. Everything beyond this threshold answers to you. The household staff, the domestic accounts, the daily operations. Mrs. Brennan works for you, whether she likes it or not. He pushed open the doors. The rooms beyond were stunning and slightly horrifying in equal measure. Clearly they'd been beautiful once. High ceilings with detailed plasterwork, tall windows overlooking the gardens, furniture that probably cost more than Elara's family's townhouse. But everything was covered in dust sheets, the air stale with disuse, and the whole space felt like a mausoleum. It needs work, Blackthorne admitted, but it's yours. Elara walked through the sitting room into the bedroom beyond. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, its curtains drawn back to reveal bedding that looked clean at least. Someone had made a token effort, probably in the last few hours, judging by the dust still visible in corners the servants had missed. Your mother, she said quietly. What was she like? Strong, practical, terrifying when she needed to be. He stood in the doorway, not entering. She would have liked you, I think, or at least respected you. Because I'm also terrifying? Because you're still standing. He met her eyes directly. Most women in your position would have collapsed by now. You're angry instead. That's better. Before Elara could respond, a commotion erupted from downstairs. Raised voices, something crashing, and then Mrs. Brennan's sharp tones cutting through it all. Blackthorne sighed. That'll be the trunks. The footmen always fight about which route to take up the stairs. He turned to leave, then paused. Dinner's at 8. Formal dress. I'll send Anne to help you prepare. Wait, you're leaving? I have business in the mines that can't wait. You'll be fine. He said it with absolute confidence, like her being fine was simply a matter of decision rather than circumstance. Remember what I told you in the carriage. Don't show weakness. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, leaving Elara alone in rooms that smelled like death and felt like a trap. She wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to run back to that carriage and demand to be taken anywhere but here. Instead, she walked to the windows and looked out at her new domain. The gardens stretched below, still beautiful despite obvious neglect. Beyond them, she could see the roof lines of other buildings. Servants' quarters, probably, and the various operations that kept an estate this size functioning. Further out, the land rolled away in waves of forest and field until it met the darkening sky. 10,000 acres. 400 people depending on this place directly, thousands more indirectly. And somewhere in all of it, hidden in the accounts Blackthorne had shown her and the details he hadn't, were the reasons this estate was failing. Elara pressed her forehead against the cool glass. She could do this. She'd survived abandonment, humiliation, and marrying a stranger in the span of 24 hours. She could survive hostile servants and dusty rooms, and a husband who thought you'll be fine constituted adequate support. The door opened behind her. Anne crept in, carrying what looked like cleaning supplies. Your Grace? Mrs. Brennan sent me to help prepare the rooms properly. The girl couldn't have been more than 16, all nervous energy and bitten fingernails. I'm sorry they weren't ready. We didn't know His Grace would want these chambers opened, and there wasn't time. It's fine, Anne. Elara turned from the window. How long have you worked here? 3 years, Your Grace, since I was 13. And what do you do? Besides being assigned to terrified new duchesses? Anne blinked, startled into something almost like a smile. I help in the household, Your Grace. Cleaning, mending, whatever's needed. Mrs. Brennan said I'd be your lady's maid now, but I've never done that before. I don't really know how. Then we'll figure it out together. Elara looked around the dusty sitting room. Let's start with making these rooms livable. What do you need? They spent the next 2 hours in a whirlwind of cleaning. Anne fetched more servants, 2 other young maids who looked equally nervous, and together they attacked the accumulated neglect. Dust sheets came off to reveal furniture that was actually quite beautiful beneath the grime. Windows were open to let in fresh air. Fires were lit in both the sitting room and bedroom fireplaces. The bathroom, a surprisingly modern addition with actual plumbing, was scrubbed until the fixtures shone. Elara worked alongside them, ignoring Anne's scandalized protests. She'd never been the type to sit idle while others worked, and besides, there was something satisfying about the simple physicality of it. Scrubbing away dust felt like scrubbing away the last 24 hours, even if she knew that was impossible. Your Grace shouldn't be doing this, Anne fretted, watching Elara attack a particularly stubborn section of floor. If Mrs. Brennan sees, then Mrs. Brennan will learn that I don't follow her rules. Elara sat back on her heels, pushing hair out of her face. These are my rooms now. I'll clean them if I want to. One of the other maids, Sarah maybe? Elara was still learning names, giggled nervously. Mrs. Brennan won't like that. I imagine Mrs. Brennan doesn't like much. Elara stood, surveying their progress. The rooms looked almost habitable now. Tell me about her. How long has she been head housekeeper? The maids exchanged glances, that universal look of servants deciding how much to tell their mistress. Anne spoke carefully. Since before the late Duchess died, Your Grace. She's been here almost 30 years. And she runs the household how? Another exchange of glances. Sarah, the braver of the two, said, Strictly, Your Grace, very strictly. There are rules for everything, and if you break them, you get dismissed, the third maid finished quietly. She's dismissed 12 servants in the last year alone. 12. In a household this size, that was significant turnover. For what infractions? Different things. Being late, breaking something, talking back. Anne twisted her apron in her hands. Mostly for questioning her, Your Grace. Mrs. Brennan doesn't like to be questioned. Elara filed that information away. A housekeeper who ruled through fear and fired anyone who challenged her authority. No wonder the household felt tense. Everyone was walking on eggshells, afraid of putting a foot wrong. Well, she said briskly, I appreciate you telling me, and I want you to know, all 3 of you, that you can speak freely to me. I won't tolerate gossip or disrespect, but honest answers to honest questions won't get you in trouble. Understood? They nodded, though they still looked uncertain. Trust would take time. Elara understood that. A clock somewhere chimed 7. An hour until dinner. Anne, help me dress, please. Sarah, can you find out what's being served tonight? I'd like to know what I'm walking into. Elara moved toward the bedroom where her trunks had finally appeared. And someone check that the dining room is actually prepared. I don't trust Mrs. Brennan not to sabotage this dinner out of spite. The maids scattered to their tasks. Elara stood in front of her open trunk, staring at the gowns packed inside. She'd brought her best things, the expensive dresses her mother had ordered for the London season, the jewels that had been her grandmother's, the accessories that marked her as a woman of quality. All of it felt like armor now, costume pieces for a role she had to play. Anne returned and helped her into a deep emerald gown that brought out her eyes. It was formal without being ostentatious, elegant without trying too hard. The kind of dress that said, I belong here without needing to shout it. Your hair, Your Grace? Anne's hands were surprisingly skilled despite her protests about inexperience. Simple, nothing too elaborate. Elara watched in the mirror as Anne worked, pinning and arranging until her hair was swept up in a style that looked effortless, but probably wasn't. Anne, how old were you when you started working here? 13, Your Grace. My mother works in the kitchens. She got me the position. And your father? Dead, Your Grace. Mine accident 5 years ago. She said it matter-of-factly, the way people spoke about tragedies they'd learned to carry. His Grace increased the safety regulations after that, made the mine owners install better supports, hired doctors to be on site. My mother says it saved lives. Elara absorbed that. Blackthorne had called himself ruthless and calculating, but apparently he also cared about keeping miners alive. The contradiction was interesting. There. Anne stepped back, admiring her work. You look beautiful, Your Grace. Elara studied her reflection. The woman looking back was polished, composed, every inch a duchess. You couldn't see the fear underneath, couldn't see the exhaustion or the anger or the desperate hope that she could somehow pull this off. Good. That was exactly the point. She made her way downstairs at precisely 8 o'clock. The dining room was on the ground floor, through a series of hallways that she was slowly beginning to map in her mind. She could hear voices as she approached, Blackthorne's low rumble, and others she didn't recognize. He wasn't alone. Elara paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. The dining room was massive, designed to host dozens, but tonight only one end of the long table was set. Blackthorne sat at the head, already dressed for dinner in formal black. But he wasn't alone. 3 other men occupied chairs nearby, all of them turning to look at her arrival. Gentlemen, Blackthorne said, standing. My wife, Duchess Elara Blackthorne. Elara, may I present Lord Hadley, Mr. Pemberton, and Sir Marcus Verne. Not the same Pemberton from the wedding breakfast. This one was younger, sharper looking, and Sir Marcus Verne would be related to Lady Catherine, the intelligence-gathering charity organizer. Elara catalogued them quickly. Hadley was older, probably 60, with the weathered look of someone who spent time outdoors. Pemberton was mid-30s, expensively dressed but with an edge of desperation in his eyes. Verne was harder to read, polite smile, calculating gaze, hands that never quite stopped moving. Your Grace? They bowed in varying degrees of sincerity. Elara took her seat at Blackthorne's right hand, the position clearly meant for her. Gentlemen, I apologize, I wasn't aware we'd have company tonight. Last-minute business, Blackthorne said smoothly. Nothing that can't be discussed over dinner. Lord Hadley manages the northern tenant farms. Mr. Pemberton handles our timber operations, and Sir Marcus oversees trade routes to the southern ports. In other words, important people she needed to impress. Wonderful. Servants appeared with the first course, soup that actually smelled good, which was something. Elara tasted it carefully, aware that everyone was watching her, testing her, waiting to see if she'd fumble the silverware or say something embarrassing. She'd been performing for critical audiences her entire life. This was just another stage. Lord Hadley, she said conversationally, His Grace mentioned the northern farms have been struggling with yields. What do you attribute that to? Hadley looked startled at being addressed directly. Soil exhaustion, primarily, Your Grace. Years of poor crop rotation. We're trying to implement new practices, but it takes time. And funding, Pemberton added with a pointed look at Blackthorne. Hard to rotate crops properly when you can't afford to let fields lie fallow. Perhaps, Elara said carefully, there are intermediate solutions? Cover crops that restore nitrogen while still producing some yield. I've read about clover and vetch being used successfully in similar situations. The table went quiet. All 3 men stared at her. You've read about crop rotation? Verna's tone was carefully neutral, but Elara heard the skepticism underneath. I read about many things, Sir Marcus. It's amazing what you can learn when you're not busy being decorative. She kept her voice light, pleasant, but the edge was there. Though I confess my knowledge is theoretical, I'd welcome practical insight from those with actual experience. Blackthorne's lips twitched, almost a smile. Hadley cleared his throat. Cover crops are an interesting idea, Your Grace, though I'm not sure the tenant farmers would. The tenant farmers will do what they're told, Pemberton interrupted. The real question is whether His Grace is willing to invest in seeds and equipment for experimental farming methods. The real question, Blackthorne said quietly, is whether we can afford not to. Continue as we are, and the northern farms will be worthless in 5 years. Try something new, and we might salvage them. He looked at Elara. My wife makes a valid point. Research what's worked elsewhere and present options. We'll evaluate them. The we landed like a small bomb. Pemberton's expression flickered, surprise, then something harder. Verne studied Elara with new interest. Even Hadley looked taken aback. Elara had just been publicly acknowledged as having input on estate decisions. Mrs. Brennan chose that moment to enter with the second course, her timing too perfect to be accidental. "The roast, Your Grace." She placed the platter in front of Blackthorne with exaggerated care. "I do hope it's to your satisfaction. We had such short notice to prepare a formal dinner." The implication was clear. Your new wife is disrupting our well-ordered household. "It looks excellent, Mrs. Brennan," Elara said before Blackthorne could respond. "Please convey my compliments to Mrs. Patterson, and in the future, I'd appreciate being informed of dinner guests before they arrive. I prefer to be prepared." Mrs. Brennan's smile was glacial. "Of course, Your Grace. Though His Grace often conducts business at unusual hours, it's difficult to predict. Then we'll establish regular meal times and stick to them. If His Grace has business guests, they can be accommodated, but I should be notified." Elara held the housekeeper's gaze steadily. "I'm sure we can work out a system that functions efficiently." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Mrs. Brennan's expression went perfectly blank. The look of someone absolutely furious, but too professional to show it. "As you say, Your Grace." She gave a curtsy that was technically correct and absolutely insolent, then swept out. Verna coughed into his wine. Pemberton looked fascinated. Hadley appeared to be praying for the floor to swallow him. Blackthorne cut into his roast with precise movements. "Well," he said mildly, "that was interesting." The rest of dinner proceeded with careful conversation about neutral topics: the weather, local politics, upcoming market fairs. The men clearly wanted to discuss business, but were equally clearly uncomfortable doing so in front of Elara. She let them squirm, answering when spoken to, but mostly observing. Pemberton was anxious about something. He kept touching his wine glass without drinking, checking the clock on the mantel. Verna was performing relaxation, every gesture calculated to appear casual. Only Hadley seemed genuinely at ease, though he spent most of the meal avoiding looking directly at anyone. By the time dessert arrived, Elara had a headache forming behind her eyes. Performing confidence was exhausting, especially when everything felt like a test. "Gentlemen," Blackthorne said as the servants cleared the final course, "let's retire to my study. There are contracts to review." They stood. Elara stood as well, preparing to excuse herself and retreat to her rooms. "Your Grace," Verna said, his tone carefully polite. "I wonder if I might have a word. My mother, Lady Catherine, specifically asked me to convey her regards. She was quite taken with you at the wedding breakfast." Elara remembered Blackthorne's advice about making allies of Lady Catherine. "Of course. Please give her my regards as well. I hope to call on her when we next return to London." "Actually," Verna's smile sharpened slightly, "she'll be visiting Blackthorne Hall next week. She's conducting a tour of northern charity organizations and specifically requested to stop here. I hope that's acceptable?" It wasn't a question. Lady Catherine was coming whether Elara found it acceptable or not. "How thoughtful of her," Elara said smoothly. "I look forward to it." After the men departed for Blackthorne's study, Elara made her way back upstairs. The house felt different at night, shadows deeper, sounds echoing strangely, all those watching portraits even more unsettling in lamplight. Anne was waiting in the sitting room, ready to help her undress. "How was dinner, Your Grace?" she asked, unlacing the back of the gown with practiced efficiency. "Educational." Elara stepped out of the dress, grateful to be free of its weight. "Anne, what do you know about Mr. Pemberton?" "The timberman?" Anne hung the dress carefully. "Not much, Your Grace. He's been dealing with His Grace for about a year. There's talk in the kitchens that he's in some kind of financial trouble, but I don't know details." "And Sir Marcus Verne?" "Oh, he's important. Family's old money. Very well connected. His mother's Lady Catherine. She knows everyone." Anne brought over a nightgown. "Are they staying at the Hall?" "No, they left after dinner. Thank heaven." Elara pulled on the nightgown, suddenly exhausted. "That'll be all, Anne. Get some sleep." After the maid left, Elara found herself alone in rooms that still felt foreign, despite hours of cleaning. She wandered through the sitting room, examining the belongings of the woman who'd lived here before. Books on the shelves, poetry, philosophy, agricultural treatises mixed with novels. A small writing desk with dried-up ink bottles. A music box that played a tune Elara didn't recognize. Blackthorne's mother had been a real person who'd lived and worked and eventually died in these rooms. Now Elara was expected to fill that same space, carry that same authority, command that same respect. She had no idea how. A knock at the door made her jump. "Come in." Blackthorne entered, still dressed for dinner but with his jacket removed and cravat loosened. He looked tired. "The contracts are signed," he said without preamble. "Pemberton's timber operation will continue under modified terms. Verne negotiated better shipping rates. Hadley is tentatively willing to try the cover crop experiment, though he thinks you're insane." "Only tentatively insane or fully committed insane?" "The jury's still out." He moved to the window, looking out at darkness. "You handled dinner well, better than I expected." "You expected me to embarrass you?" "I expected you to be nervous. You were, but you hid it effectively. That's a useful skill." He turned back to face her. "Mrs. Brennan, however, now officially hates you. The feeling is mutual." "Good. Mutual hatred is easier to work with than one-sided resentment." He leaned against the wall, studying her. "She'll test you, probably soon. Small rebellions at first, things not getting done, staff suddenly unavailable, accounts mysteriously complicated. She's very good at making life difficult while maintaining plausible deniability." "Lovely. Any advice?" "Document everything. Keep your own records. Don't rely on her for information because she'll either lie or strategically omit important details." He paused. "And don't try to be liked. Respected is better. Feared is even better than that." "I'm not interested in being feared by terrified maids. I'm not talking about maids. I'm talking about people like Mrs. Brennan, who've held power for years and won't surrender it gracefully. Being nice to her won't work. She'll see it as weakness. Being harsh might, but being absolutely unmovable, that she'll respect eventually." Elara sank into a chair, suddenly too tired to stand. "This isn't what I signed up for." "You signed up for marriage to a stranger in exchange for financial security. This," he gestured around the room, "is what that actually means. Did you think it would be easier?" "I didn't think much at all. I was too busy surviving." "Fair enough." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Lady Catherine's visit next week. It's not social. She's coming to assess you." "Assess me for what?" "To determine if you're an asset or a liability. If you're worth cultivating or if I've made a disastrous mistake marrying you." He said it without emotion, just stating facts. "She's one of the most powerful women in society. Her opinion will shape how everyone else sees you." "No pressure then." "Considerable pressure, actually, but I think you can handle it." He opened the door. "One more thing. There's a gathering in 3 days. Local nobility, important tenants, people who keep this estate functioning. They'll all want to meet the new Duchess. Consider it your formal introduction." 3 days? That's not enough time. It's what you have. Make it work." And he was gone, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Elara sat in the dim sitting room, listening to the house settle around her. 3 days to prepare for a gathering where she'd be evaluated by everyone who mattered in this corner of the world. A week until Lady Catherine arrived to judge whether she was worthy of investment or deserving of destruction. And somewhere in all of it, she was supposed to learn how to run a household, manage servants, understand estate operations, and prove she wasn't the scandal everyone believed her to be. She wanted to cry, wanted to rage, wanted to run back to London and beg her family to take her back, Blackthorne's money and protection be damned. Instead, she stood up, walked to the writing desk, and lit a lamp. If she only had 3 days, she wasn't going to waste time on self-pity. She had work to do. The next morning arrived too early and too bright. Anne woke her at dawn, apologizing profusely but explaining that Mrs. Brennan had scheduled the household staff meeting for 7 and expected the Duchess to attend. Of course she had. Elara dressed quickly in a practical day dress, let Anne do something simple with her hair, and made her way downstairs to find approximately 30 servants assembled in what looked like a morning room. Mrs. Brennan stood at the front, her expression carefully neutral when Elara entered. "Your Grace, how kind of you to join us." The emphasis on kind made it clear that attendance wasn't optional. We were just reviewing the weekly household schedule. Elara took a position near the front, forcing several servants to shift to accommodate her. "Please continue." Mrs. Brennan's smile could have frozen water. "As I was saying, the linens will be changed on Tuesday, the silver polished on Wednesday, and the guest rooms prepared on Thursday in anticipation of Friday's gathering. Cook will need additional help in the kitchens beginning tomorrow, so I'll be reassigning some of the upstairs maids." "Which maids?" Elara asked. Mrs. Brennan blinked. I'm sorry, Your Grace? Which upstairs maids are being reassigned? I'd like to know so I can adjust my own schedule accordingly. That's not usually something Her Grace concerns herself with. Well, this Her Grace does. If my maid is going to be unavailable, I need to know. Elara kept her tone pleasant but firm. So, which maids? A muscle twitched in Mrs. Brennan's jaw. Sarah and Mary, Your Grace. Anne will remain available to you. Thank you. Continue. The meeting proceeded with painful attention to minute detail. Apparently, Mrs. Brennan liked to micromanage everything from flower arrangements to which footmen stood where during meals. Elara listened, made mental notes, and said nothing else until the very end. One more item, she said as servants began to disperse. From now on, I'd like these meetings scheduled at a time that allows me to review the agenda beforehand. Mrs. Brennan, please provide me with a written summary of planned activities by the evening before each meeting. Mrs. Brennan's expression went carefully blank. Of course, Your Grace, though I should mention the late Duchess preferred to trust my judgment on household matters. She found the details tedious. I'm not the late Duchess. Elara met her eyes steadily. I prefer to be informed. I'm sure that won't be a problem. The room had gone silent. Every servant was watching this exchange with barely concealed fascination. No problem at all, Your Grace. Mrs. Brennan's smile was pure venom wrapped in courtesy. Will that be all? For now. The servants scattered. Mrs. Brennan departed with her spine rigid enough to hold up the entire house. Elara stood alone in the morning room, her heart hammering, wondering if she'd just made a terrible mistake. That was bold. She spun to find Blackthorne leaning against the doorframe, watching her with something that might have been approval. Were you eavesdropping? I was passing by and heard interesting sounds of conflict. He entered properly, closing the door behind him. You just declared war on my head housekeeper. She scheduled a meeting at dawn without telling me. That's not respect. That's a power play. I agree, which is why I'm not telling you to back down. He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back. But understand what you've started. Mrs. Brennan doesn't lose gracefully. She'll escalate. Let her. Elara surprised herself with the conviction in her voice. I'm tired of people thinking they can push me around because I'm new or young or because I was abandoned at my wedding. I'm the Duchess now. Either that means something or it doesn't. Blackthorne turned, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely pleased. Good. Hold on to that anger. You're going to need it. He left her there, standing in morning light that painted everything gold, feeling like she'd just stepped off a cliff and wasn't sure yet if she'd fall or fly. The next 3 days were chaos. Elara threw herself into preparing for the gathering with single-minded focus. She toured the entire estate with Blackthorne, learning which buildings housed what operations, meeting foremen and managers and tenant farmers whose livelihoods depended on decisions made in the manor house. She reviewed household accounts and found inconsistencies that made her suspicious. Expenses that seemed inflated, payments that weren't properly documented. She confronted Mrs. Brennan about the accounts. The housekeeper had explanations for everything, of course. Emergencies that required immediate payment, suppliers who only accepted cash, receipts that had been misplaced. All plausible, all conveniently impossible to verify. I'll need better documentation going forward, Elara said, keeping her voice level. Detailed receipts, multiple vendor quotes for major purchases, proper approval processes. That will slow everything down considerably, Your Grace. Then things will be slower, but they'll be accountable. The gathering arrived before Elara felt remotely ready. The manor filled with people, local nobles who held smaller estates nearby, wealthy merchants who traded with Blackthorne Industries, important tenants whose farms were large enough to matter politically. 60 people, all dressed in their finest, all curious to meet the woman who'd somehow trapped a duke into marriage. Elara wore deep blue silk that brought out her eyes, her grandmother's pearls at her throat, and an expression of perfect composure that hid the screaming anxiety underneath. Blackthorne stood beside her in the receiving line, playing the devoted husband with surprising skill. Lord and Lady Morrison, he said, introducing a couple Elara didn't recognize. They hold the estate 3 miles west. Your Grace. Lady Morrison, not the same one from London, thank heavens, curtsied with genuine warmth. What a pleasure. We've been so curious to meet you. The pleasure is mine, Lady Morrison. Elara smiled. I'm still learning the area. Perhaps you could tell me about your estate. They talked about farming and local politics and how the unseasonably warm spring was affecting crops. Lady Morrison was pleasant, genuinely interested, asking questions that felt like curiosity rather than interrogation. Not everyone was so kind. Quite a whirlwind romance, Lord Pemberton, the older one from London, commented when he finally made his way through the line. One day abandoned, the next day a duchess. Remarkable timing. Fortune favors the adaptable, Lord Pemberton. Elara kept her smile fixed. I'm very grateful for His Grace's timely intervention. I'm sure you are. His eyes were cold. Though one does wonder what prompted such generosity. His Grace has never been known for impulsive charity. Blackthorne's hand found the small of Elara's back, a gesture of support that looked like affection. Careful, Pemberton. You're dangerously close to insulting my wife. Merely observing, Your Grace. No insult intended. Then I'm sure you won't mind observing from across the room. Pemberton's expression soured, but he moved along. Other nobles followed, some genuine, some merely curious, some openly hostile. Elara catalogued them all, noting who seemed friendly, who seemed dangerous, who seemed worth cultivating. The evening progressed into dinner, then dancing. Elara found herself passed between partners, making conversation about nothing while trying to gather useful information. She danced with Hadley, who was awkward but kind, with Verne, who asked pointed questions about her family's finances, with a dozen other men whose names blurred together. And then Mrs. Brennan appeared at her elbow with a young woman in tow. Your Grace, may I present Miss Caroline Ashford? The world tilted. Caroline Ashford, Marcus's younger sister. She looked like him. Same blonde hair, same blue eyes, same pretty features that probably hid the same rotten core. Your Grace, Caroline's curtsy was perfect, her smile sweet. I wanted to personally congratulate you on your marriage. My brother sends his regards. The audacity was breathtaking. Elara felt rage building in her chest, hot and dangerous. How kind of him, she said, her voice like ice over steel. Though I'm surprised he'd send regards considering he stole my dowry and left me humiliated before 200 witnesses. Caroline's smile never wavered. I'm sure that was all a terrible misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. Your brother is a thief and a coward. Elara spoke quietly, aware that people nearby were listening. And you have approximately 30 seconds to leave my presence before I have you thrown out of my house. The sweet mask cracked. Caroline's eyes went hard. Your house? You've been here less than a week, which makes it 24 hours longer than you'll ever be welcome here again. Elara turned to find Mrs. Brennan watching with barely concealed satisfaction. Mrs. Brennan, Miss Ashford is leaving immediately. See to it. Your Grace, I'm sure if we just... Now, Mrs. Brennan, or I'll escort her out myself. For a long moment, the housekeeper just stared at her. The entire room had gone quiet, everyone watching this confrontation with fascinated horror. Then Blackthorne was there, his presence like a physical force. You heard the Duchess. Miss Ashford is leaving. I suggest you make it happen before this becomes any more embarrassing for everyone involved. Mrs. Brennan's expression went carefully neutral. Of course, Your Grace. Caroline was escorted out, her protests fading as the doors closed behind her. The room slowly returned to normal conversation levels, though Elara could feel the weight of stares and whispers. She just made a scene, publicly humiliated someone at her own gathering, contradicted her housekeeper in front of 60 witnesses. She should probably feel guilty. She felt powerful. Blackthorne leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. Well done, though you've just made an enemy of the entire Ashford family. They were already enemies, at least now they know it. Elara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together, hiding the tremor. Was I wrong? No. His hand touched her elbow, steadying her. You were perfect, dangerous and unflinching, exactly what I needed you to be. The gathering continued, but something had shifted. People looked at Elara differently now, not with pity or contempt, but with wariness. Respect, maybe, or at least the beginnings of it. She'd drawn a line, shown that she had teeth. Now she just had to hope she could back it up. The morning after the gathering, Elara woke to find a letter slipped under her door. She knew before opening it that it wouldn't be good news. Good news arrived with breakfast trays and polite knocking. Bad news slithered in during the night like something poisonous. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the paper expensive. She broke the seal. Your Grace, how unfortunate that you've chosen to make enemies so quickly. The Ashford family has many friends, and memories in society are quite long. I wonder how His Grace will feel when your recklessness begins costing him alliances he's spent years building. A word of advice. Women who overreach tend to fall hardest. Yours in concern, a friend. Elara crumpled the letter, then immediately smoothed it out again. Evidence. She'd need evidence of everything now. Anne arrived with breakfast looking nervous. Your Grace, Mrs. Brennan wants to see you in her office. She said it's urgent. Of course she did. The housekeeper had been humiliated last night when Elara overruled her in front of the entire gathering. Time for retaliation. Elara dressed quickly in a simple morning dress and made her way to Mrs. Brennan's domain, a small office off the kitchens that the housekeeper had turned into her personal fortress. The door was open. Mrs. Brennan sat behind her desk, surrounded by ledgers and account books, looking like a general preparing for war. Your Grace, thank you for coming. The courtesy was acid thin. We have a problem. You cool? Only one? I'm impressed. Elara remained standing, refusing the chair Mrs. Brennan hadn't offered. What is it? The household accounts don't balance. There's a discrepancy of nearly 300 pounds. She pushed a ledger across the desk. Given your recent interest in our financial processes, I thought you should be informed immediately. 300 pounds. A substantial sum, but not catastrophic for an estate this size. Elara picked up the ledger, scanning the entries. When did you discover this? This morning, when I was preparing the weekly reports for His Grace. Mrs. Brennan's expression remained neutral. The missing funds appear to have been allocated to household expenses over the past month. Payments that were approved, but never properly documented. Approved by whom? By me, Your Grace. As head housekeeper, I have authority to authorize routine expenses. A pause, perfectly timed. Though I notice many of these expenditures coincide with your arrival and the preparations for the gathering. The implication was clear. Elara's presence had caused chaos, and now money was missing. Either she was incompetent or she was being set up. I see. Elara set down the ledger carefully. And you're certain the funds are actually missing, not simply misfiled or improperly recorded? I keep meticulous records, Your Grace. Then we'll need to audit everything. Every payment, every receipt, every authorization going back at least 6 months. Elara watched Mrs. Brennan's face carefully. If there's truly money missing, we need to find where it went. I'm sure His Grace will want a full accounting. Something flickered in the housekeeper's eyes. Annoyance? Fear? That will take considerable time. Then we should start immediately. I'll help. That's not necessary. I insist. Elara smiled without warmth. After all, as you pointed out, many of these expenses relate to my arrival. I should be involved in investigating them. They stared at each other across the desk. The morning light through the window made the dust motes visible, tiny particles suspended in hostile air. Very well, Your Grace. Mrs. Brennan's voice could have frozen flames. I'll begin gathering the documentation. Elara left the office feeling like she'd just barely avoided a trap, only to walk into another one. Mrs. Brennan was too smart to make obvious mistakes. If she was claiming money was missing, either it genuinely was, which meant someone was stealing from the estate, or she'd deliberately created the discrepancy to make Elara look incompetent. Either way, Elara was going to have to prove herself capable of solving it. She found Blackthorne in his study, buried in correspondence that looked equally unpleasant. He glanced up when she entered without knocking. We have a problem, she said. I'm aware. I have 17 problems currently, all of them urgent. Which one are you referring to? Mrs. Brennan claims there's 300 pounds missing from the household accounts. That got his attention. He set down his pen. Missing or misallocated? She says missing, expenses that were approved but not properly documented. She's implying it's related to my arrival and the gathering preparations. Blackthorne's expression darkened. Of course she is. Let me guess. She discovered this conveniently this morning while preparing reports for you. Elara moved to the window, too restless to sit. I told her we'd audit everything going back 6 months. She wasn't pleased. I imagine not. He stood, walking to a cabinet where he kept what looked like more account books. Mrs. Brennan has been managing household finances with minimal oversight for years. If we start actually examining her records, we might find more than missing funds. Exactly. He pulled out several ledgers, dropping them on his desk with heavy thuds. My mother trusted her completely. After Mother died, I was too busy keeping the duchy from collapsing to question how the household was run. That was a mistake. So what do? We audit everything, like you said, and we do it properly, not just household accounts, but all estate expenditures. If there's theft happening, it's not just Mrs. Brennan. She's too smart to steal, obviously, but she might be covering for someone else or taking a percentage of inflated expenses. He looked at her directly. This is going to be ugly. She'll fight back, probably by making your life as miserable as possible. She already does that. It will get worse. His tone was matter of fact, not unkind. Are you prepared for that? Elara thought about the anonymous letter under her door, about Caroline Ashford's venomous smile, about the gathering where she'd drawn blood in front of 60 witnesses. She'd already made enemies. What was a few more? I'm prepared. Good! Blackthorne gathered the ledgers. Then let's find out who's stealing from me. And when we do, his smile was cold enough to make Elara's spine straighten. We'll make an example of them. The audit took 3 days and revealed a pattern that made Elara's stomach turn. Mrs. Brennan's records were, as advertised, meticulous. Every expense documented, every payment authorized, every receipt filed precisely. But when Elara started comparing the household accounts against the estate's general ledgers and the invoices from suppliers, discrepancies appeared like cracks in fine china. Payments to suppliers that were higher than the invoices showed. Routine expenses that happened with suspicious regularity. Small overcharges, £5 here, 10 there, that added up to substantial sums over months. Look at this. Elara spread papers across the library table where she'd been working. Blackthorne stood beside her, his expression growing darker as she explained. Mrs. Brennan paid the butcher £20 for meat in March. But here's the invoice from the butcher. It's for £15. The extra £5 went somewhere. Could be a mistake. Once maybe, but it happens consistently. Different suppliers, different amounts, but always the same pattern. Payments higher than invoices. She pulled out another stack. And look at these. Repairs to the East Wing that were never actually done. Replacement linens that were never delivered. Coal orders that don't match what actually arrived. Blackthorne picked up an invoice, examining it closely. The invoices are real. I recognize the supplier's marks. The invoices are real, but I think the amounts have been altered. Someone's changing the totals after the fact, collecting the difference. Elara pointed to a water stain on one document. See this? The ink here is slightly different from the rest. Someone rewrote the total. So Mrs. Brennan is stealing. I don't think so. She's too careful. If she wanted to steal, she'd do it less obviously. Elara pulled out her notes. But I think she's protecting whoever is. Look at the authorization signatures. Most are hers, but some are initialed by other staff. The steward, the head footman, even some of the kitchen workers. What if it's not one person, but several? Small thefts spread across multiple people, all enabled by Mrs. Brennan looking the other way. Why would she do that? Control. Elara sat back, exhausted from 3 days of staring at numbers. If half your staff is stealing small amounts with your tacit approval, they're all compromised. They all need you to keep protecting them. It's brilliant, actually. She's bought loyalty through collective guilt. Blackthorne was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he moved to the door and locked it. If what you're suggesting is true, if Mrs. Brennan has turned my household staff into a conspiracy of thieves, then we have a serious problem. I know. We can't just fire everyone. The estate would collapse without staff. But we can't let this continue either. He paced, agitated in a way Elara had never seen him. And if we accuse them without proof solid enough to convict in a magistrate's court, they'll all deny it. Mrs. Brennan will produce explanations for everything, and will look like we're persecuting loyal servants. So we need better proof. We need a confession, or we need to catch them actively stealing. He stopped pacing, turned to face her. Which means setting a trap. Elara's pulse quickened. What kind of trap? We create an opportunity. Something too tempting to resist. A large payment for a fake expense, carefully documented, with specific marked bills that can be traced. His eyes gleamed with something dangerous. And we watch to see who takes the bait. That could take weeks. And if they suspect, then we'll have confirmed they're not just stealing, but actively watching us for threats. He moved back to the table, studying her notes. But we'll need help. Someone trustworthy who can act as our eyes without arousing suspicion. Anne, Elara said immediately. My maid. She's loyal, and she has access to servant gossip without being suspicious. Are you certain? If she's part of this... She's not. I've watched her. She's terrified of Mrs. Brennan, doesn't have unexplained money, and actually seems to care about doing her job well. Elara stood, decisiveness replacing exhaustion. I trust her. Then we'll need to bring her in carefully. If Mrs. Brennan suspects we're investigating with help from inside the household... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. A knock at the library door made them both freeze. Your Grace? It was Graves, the butler, his voice muffled through the wood. Lady Catherine Verne has arrived. She's waiting in the drawing room. Lady Catherine. Elara had completely forgotten about her visit, too buried in accounting to remember the assessment that could determine her entire social future. Perfect timing, Blackthorne muttered. Hide those. He gestured at the incriminating papers spread across the table. Elara gathered them quickly while Blackthorne went to unlock the door. Graves stood in the hallway, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes curious about why the library had been locked. Tell Lady Catherine we'll be down momentarily, Blackthorne said. Of course, Your Grace. And, Your Grace, he addressed Elara. Mrs. Brennan wanted me to inform you that she's prepared the guest suite for Lady Catherine. She'll be staying 3 nights. 3 nights. 3 nights of being evaluated by one of society's most influential women while simultaneously investigating her own household staff for theft. Wonderful. Elara changed quickly into a more formal afternoon dress, let Anne fix her hair into something presentable, and made her way to the drawing room with a sense of walking toward her own execution. Lady Catherine Verne was exactly as Elara remembered from the wedding breakfast. Elegant, composed, with eyes that missed nothing. She sat in the best chair like she owned it, teacup balanced perfectly, taking in the room's details with the focused attention of someone cataloging weaknesses. Your Grace. She rose gracefully, offering a smile that seemed genuine. How wonderful to see you again. Thank you for accommodating my visit on such short notice. The pleasure is ours, Lady Catherine. Elara settled into the chair across from her, grateful that years of deportment lessons made the social performance automatic even when her mind was elsewhere. I hope your journey was pleasant, long but worthwhile. I've been visiting charity organizations throughout the North, such important work, and so often underfunded. Her gaze sharpened slightly. Though I confess, I was particularly eager to see Blackthorne Hall. It's been years since I visited, and I hear you've been making quite an impression. Code 4, I've heard you're causing chaos, and I'm here to determine if you're an asset or a disaster. I'm still learning, Elara said carefully. The estate is larger and more complex than anything I've experienced before. But you're rising to the challenge, from what I hear. My son tells me you've been involving yourself in agricultural decisions and household management with unusual enthusiasm for a new bride. Lady Catherine sipped her tea. Most young women in your position would be focused on decorating and social calls. Most young women weren't abandoned at the altar and married off to strangers in front of 200 witnesses. Elara surprised herself with her bluntness. I don't have the luxury of typical concerns. Lady Catherine's eyebrows rose fractionally. Then she laughed, genuine amusement that transformed her face from elegant to warm. Well, at least you're honest about it. That's refreshing. Blackthorne entered then, saving Elara from having to figure out how to respond. He greeted Lady Catherine with practiced courtesy, exchanged pleasantries about her journey and her charitable work, and settled into the conversation with an ease that Elara envied. They talked for an hour about nothing important, society gossip, political movements, the upcoming season in London. Lady Catherine asked pointed questions disguised as casual conversation, and Elara answered as best she could, aware she was being tested and uncertain if she was passing. Finally, as evening approached, Lady Catherine set down her teacup with an air of finality. I wonder, Your Grace, if you might show me the estate tomorrow. I'd love to see how things have changed since my last visit. And perhaps, her smile sharpened. You could tell me about your plans for managing such a substantial household. I'm always interested in how capable women approach large-scale domestic challenges. It wasn't a request. It was an opportunity to prove herself or fail spectacularly. I'd be delighted, Elara said, hoping her smile looked confident rather than terrified. That night, she barely slept. Between worrying about Lady Catherine's assessment and the theft investigation, and the anonymous threatening letter and Mrs. Brennan's increasingly hostile glares, her mind spun in circles that prevented any real rest. She was standing at her window watching dawn break when Anne knocked softly. "Your Grace? You're awake already?" "Couldn't sleep." Elara turned from the window. "Anne, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." The maid's face went pale. "Your Grace, if I've done something wrong?" "No, nothing like that." Elara gestured for her to sit, an unusual informality that made Anne even more nervous. "I need your help with something delicate. But first, I need to know, have you noticed anything strange about the household accounts? Supplies that don't arrive, expenses that seem unusual, money that doesn't quite add up?" Anne's eyes went wide. "Your Grace, I don't know anything about accounts. But you talk to the other servants. You hear things." Elara kept her voice gentle. "I'm not trying to get anyone in trouble. I'm trying to understand what's happening in this house. Please, Anne, I need someone I can trust." The girl twisted her apron in her hands, clearly torn between loyalty to her fellow servants and loyalty to her mistress. Finally, she spoke quietly. "There's talk, Your Grace, in the servants' hall, about people having more money than they should. Not much, just little things. Sarah bought new shoes last month, said she'd been saving, but she'd just sent money home to her sick mother the week before. And Thomas, one of the footmen, he's been talking about visiting his family in the south. That takes coin he shouldn't have." "How long has this been happening?" "Years, Your Grace, since before you arrived. We all just accepted it. Mrs. Brennan takes care of her own. That's what people say. If you're loyal to her, she makes sure you're looked after." "Looked after how?" Anne's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Extra payments. For special services. Mostly just looking the other way when things go missing or numbers don't match. Small things, but it adds up." Elara's stomach clenched. Her theory was right. Mrs. Brennan had built a system of corruption that spread through the entire staff. "Anne, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to be very, very careful." She held the maid's frightened gaze. "I need you to pay attention to who's spending more than they should, who's suddenly buying things, taking trips, sending money home. Can you do that without making anyone suspicious?" "I think so, Your Grace. But if Mrs. Brennan finds out, she won't. Not if you're careful. Just listen and remember, that's all." Anne nodded slowly, still looking terrified but determined. "I'll try, Your Grace." After the maid left, Elara dressed for the day with mechanical precision, her mind already racing ahead to the challenges waiting. Lady Catherine's tour, the theft investigation, whatever retribution Mrs. Brennan was planning. She was exhausted, and it was barely 7 in the morning. The tour with Lady Catherine began after breakfast, and quickly proved to be less about seeing the estate and more about interrogating Elara's competence. "And how many tenant farms does Blackthorne control directly?" Lady Catherine asked as they walked through the gardens. 43, with an additional 27 that lease land under separate agreements. Elara had spent half the night memorizing numbers. Total agricultural production across all holdings amounts to approximately— "I don't need exact figures, dear. I'm asking if you know." Lady Catherine's smile was approving. "Most women wouldn't bother learning such details. Most women aren't trying to help manage an estate this size while fighting off rumors that they've weakened their husband's position." "Ah, so you're aware of what people are saying." "I'd be an idiot not to be." Elara kept walking, focusing on the path ahead. "The story is that I'm a burden. A scandal that forced His Grace into an unwanted marriage, distracted him from important work, and caused him to withdraw from society. That since our wedding, his influence has declined." "And is that true?" "Parts of it. I am a scandal. The marriage was sudden. He has been more absent from London than usual." Elara stopped, turning to face Lady Catherine directly. "But the decline started long before I arrived. This estate has been struggling for years. The household is rife with corruption. The agricultural operations are outdated. The trade agreements are failing. I didn't cause those problems. I just became a convenient person to blame for them. Lady Catherine studied her with new intensity. You've done your research. I've done survival. There's a difference. Indeed there is. The older woman resumed walking, but her expression had shifted to something more thoughtful. Tell me, Your Grace, what do you want? Not what you're supposed to want, not what sounds appropriate. What do you actually want from this marriage and this position? Elara considered lying, considered giving the answer she knew she should give, something about partnership and duty and serving her husband's interests. But Lady Catherine's eyes saw through pretense like glass, and Elara was too tired for games. I want to be useful, necessary. I want people to look at me and see someone valuable rather than someone pitied. The words came out raw. I spent my whole life being decorative, being told my worth was in my beauty and connections and potential marriage. Then I was abandoned in the most public way possible, and suddenly I wasn't even that anymore. I was just nothing, a failure. So yes, I want this marriage to work because I need the security. But more than that, I want to prove I'm more than what happened to me. Lady Catherine's expression had gone soft, not pitying, but understanding. That's honest, painfully so. Most women would dress it up with prettier language. I'm tired of pretty language. It didn't save me at the altar. No, it rarely does. They'd reached the edge of the garden where the formal landscaping gave way to rougher grounds. One more question then. What are you willing to do to get what you want? How far will you go? It felt like a test. Probably was. Elara thought about Mrs. Brennan's ledgers, about the trap they were setting, about confronting Caroline Ashford in front of 60 people. As far as necessary, she said quietly. I'm not interested in being cruel, but I'm done being weak. Lady Catherine smiled, a real smile, sharp and satisfied. Good, because I'm about to make your life considerably more complicated, and I need to know you can handle it. What do you mean? I mean that I'm hosting a gathering in London next month. A major event, lords, ladies, influential merchants, foreign diplomats. Everyone who matters will be there. Her eyes gleamed. And I'm going to publicly sponsor you as one of the season's most promising young duchesses, which means every eye in society will be watching to see if you succeed or fail spectacularly. Elara's heart lurched. Why would you do that? Because I think you have potential. Because I despise women who let circumstances destroy them. And you clearly refuse to do that. And because... Lady Catherine's smile turned dangerous. I enjoy gambling on interesting outcomes. You're either going to become a significant force in society, or you're going to create the most entertaining disaster I've seen in years. Either way, I win. That's insane. That's strategy. She said it exactly the way Blackthorne would have. So, will you accept my sponsorship, or would you prefer to stay hidden here where it's safe? Safe. Nothing about Blackthorne Hall felt safe. Not with Mrs. Brennan's hostility, not with theft happening under her nose, not with anonymous threats sliding under her door. But London would be worse. London would be Caroline Ashford and Lord Pemberton and everyone who'd witnessed her humiliation, all gathered to watch her try to rebuild a reputation from ruins. I'll do it, Elara heard herself say. I accept. Excellent. Lady Catherine looked genuinely pleased. Then we have much to prepare. You'll need appropriate wardrobe, proper coaching on current social dynamics, and most importantly, you'll need to resolve whatever crisis is brewing here before we leave. You can't afford to have scandals erupting at home while you're trying to build influence in London. What makes you think there's a crisis brewing? Because I've been watching your housekeeper all morning, and she looks like a woman preparing for battle. Also, your butler keeps glancing at you like he's worried you're about to do something reckless. And she gestured toward the manor. There's enough tension in that household to choke a horse. Whatever you're dealing with, deal with it soon. You can't fight wars on multiple fronts. They returned to the house to find chaos erupting. Servants were rushing through hallways, voices raised in argument somewhere deeper in the building. Graves appeared looking harried, the first time Elara had seen the butler display any emotion. Your Grace, I apologize for the disturbance. There's been an incident. What kind of incident? Perhaps it's best if you see for yourself. He led them toward the kitchens, where the shouting was coming from. They found Mrs. Brennan in the center of a storm, her face flushed with rage, facing down a young footman who looked terrified. The kitchen staff had stopped working entirely, watching the confrontation with wide eyes. Absolutely unacceptable, Mrs. Brennan was saying. You will explain where you got that money, or you will be dismissed immediately. I told you, my aunt sent it. The footman, Thomas, Elara realized, the one Anne had mentioned, was clutching a letter. She sold her house and wanted to help. Your aunt is a seamstress who can barely afford rent. She doesn't have money to send you. Mrs. Brennan's eyes were cold. You've been stealing, and now you'll face the consequences. I haven't stolen anything. Then explain the 30 pounds in your room. The kitchen went dead silent. 30 pounds was more than a footman earned in months. Elara stepped forward. Mrs. Brennan, what's happening? The housekeeper turned, and for just a second, Elara saw calculation flash across her face before it smoothed into professional concern. Your Grace, I apologize for the disruption. I discovered that Thomas has been stealing from the household and was just... I wasn't stealing. Thomas's voice cracked. I swear, Your Grace, the money was from my aunt. A likely story, Mrs. Brennan said coldly. Your Grace, I recommend immediate dismissal. We cannot tolerate theft. Elara looked at Thomas, genuinely terrified, clutching his letter like a lifeline. Then at Mrs. Brennan, composed, righteous, absolutely certain of her position. And suddenly she understood. This wasn't about Thomas stealing. This was a message. Mrs. Brennan had discovered that Elara was investigating the household accounts, so she'd manufactured a theft to demonstrate her power. See what happens when you question my authority? I can destroy anyone I want. Let me see the letter, Elara said. Thomas handed it over with shaking hands. It was from his aunt, written in careful script, explaining that she'd sold her cottage and wanted her nephew to have some of the proceeds to visit her before she got too old to enjoy his company. It could be real, could be fabricated. There was no way to know for certain. And you found this money in his room? Elara asked Mrs. Brennan. Yes, Your Grace. Hidden under his mattress. Clearly, he was trying to conceal it. Or he was trying to keep it safe. Elara held the letter carefully. When did you search his room? Mrs. Brennan hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. This morning, Your Grace. There have been reports of items going missing, so I conducted inspections of all servant quarters. All of them, or just Thomas's? Another hesitation. I began with the footman's quarters, Your Grace. I see. Elara handed the letter back to Thomas. Mrs. Brennan, I'd like to speak with you privately. Thomas, you're dismissed to your duties. We'll investigate this properly before making any decisions about your employment. Your Grace? Mrs. Brennan's voice had an edge now. I must protest. This is clearly a case of, we'll discuss it privately. Elara held her gaze. Now. They retreated to Mrs. Brennan's office, Lady Catherine following with interest despite Elara's silent plea for privacy. The housekeeper was vibrating with barely contained fury. Your Grace, I must insist that you support my authority in matters of household discipline. If the servants think they can appeal to you whenever... Did you plant that money in Thomas's room? Mrs. Brennan went very still. I beg your pardon? It's a simple question. Did you plant 30 pounds in Thomas's room so you could accuse him of theft? Elara kept her voice level. Because it's very convenient timing, given that I've been auditing the household accounts and finding significant discrepancies. Your Grace, I would never... Don't lie to me. Elara's control slipped, anger bleeding through. I know about the theft, the altered invoices, the inflated expenses, the missing money. I know you've been enabling it for years, and I know you're protecting people who are stealing from this estate. So either admit it, or I'll have every single account audited by outside professionals, and we'll let a magistrate sort out who's guilty. The color drained from Mrs. Brennan's face. Behind Elara, Lady Catherine made a small sound of interest. You have no proof, the housekeeper said, but her voice had lost its certainty. I have 3 days' worth of documented discrepancies, altered invoices, and testimony from servants about unexplained income. That's enough to start a criminal investigation. Elara leaned forward. But I'm willing to make a deal. You resign quietly today, and I won't pursue charges. You can leave with a reference and your reputation intact. But you leave. Mrs. Brennan's hands clenched on her desk. You can't dismiss me. I've served this family for 30 years, and for most of those years you've been stealing from them. Yes or no, Mrs. Brennan? Resign or face prosecution? For a long, tense moment, the housekeeper just stared at her. Then her expression twisted into something ugly. "You foolish little girl. You think you can just walk in here and tear down everything I've built? You think you understand how this household works?" She stood, leaning over the desk. "You'll fail without me. This estate will collapse, and everyone will know it's because you destroyed the one person who actually kept things running. Then I'll fail on my own terms rather than succeed on yours." Elara stood as well, refusing to be intimidated. "You have until tonight to pack. After that, I'll have you escorted off the property." She turned and left before Mrs. Brennan could respond, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Lady Catherine followed, closing the door behind them. In the hallway, with the kitchen staff pretending not to eavesdrop, Lady Catherine laughed quietly. "Well, that was more dramatic than I expected. Are you certain that was wise?" "No?" Elara's hands were shaking, but it was necessary. "Indeed." Lady Catherine's expression was thoughtful. "Though you realize you've just made an enemy who knows every secret of this household and has 30 years of connections to use against you." "I know. And you'll need to find a new head housekeeper, retrain staff, and rebuild household operations from scratch while preparing for my London gathering." "I know that too. And Mrs. Brennan will spread vicious rumors about you being a tyrant who fired loyal servants on flimsy accusations?" "Let her try." Elara met Lady Catherine's eyes. "I'm done being afraid of what people will say. They're already saying I ruined a duke. What's one more rumor?" Lady Catherine smiled, genuinely, fully, with something that looked like pride. "My dear, I think you're going to be exactly the kind of trouble society needs. Come. Let's have tea and you can tell me precisely what you found in those accounts. I do love a good scandal, especially when it involves corruption." That evening, Mrs. Brennan left Blackthorne Hall with 2 trunks and a letter of resignation that blamed irreconcilable differences with the new Duchess. She didn't say goodbye to the staff who'd worked under her for decades, didn't offer explanations or apologies. She simply left, taking with her 30 years of institutional knowledge and Elara suspected a burning desire for revenge. Blackthorne found Elara in the library later, surrounded by household ledgers and looking exhausted. "I heard," he said simply, "Mrs. Brennan is gone. She resigned, or I forced her to resign, depending on how you look at it. And the household? In chaos. The staff doesn't know what to do without her. Half of them are terrified I'll fire them next. The other half are quietly celebrating her departure." Elara rubbed her eyes. "I have no idea how to run a household this size without a head housekeeper." "Then we'll find someone trustworthy, someone from outside who doesn't owe loyalty to the old system." He moved to sit across from her. "You took a significant risk today." "I know. Mrs. Brennan will retaliate. She has connections throughout the county. She'll spread stories that make you look incompetent, tyrannical, possibly insane." "I know that too." And Lady Catherine witnessed the entire confrontation, which means all of London will know about it within days. "Are you trying to make me feel worse?" Elara looked up at him. "Because if so, congratulations. It's working." Blackthorne leaned back, studying her. "Actually, I'm trying to make you understand what you've accomplished. You identified corruption that had been hidden for years. You confronted someone with far more experience and institutional power. You made an impossible choice and stood by it even knowing the consequences. That's not weakness, Elara. That's exactly what I needed." The unexpected praise made her throat tight. "She's going to destroy me. She's going to try. There's a difference." He stood, gathering some of the ledgers. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we start rebuilding. But tonight," his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You should know that you did well, better than well. You were dangerous." After he left, Elara sat alone in the library, listening to the house settle into night around her. Somewhere in the servants' quarters, people were probably gossiping about the new Duchess, who'd fired the head housekeeper. In London, Lady Catherine was probably already writing letters about the scandal, and wherever Mrs. Brennan had gone, she was undoubtedly planning her revenge. Elara had drawn first blood. Now she'd have to survive the retaliation. She was gathering the ledgers to return to Blackthorne's study when she noticed something, a page that had been filed incorrectly, stuck between 2 account books. She pulled it free, frowning at the unfamiliar handwriting. It was a letter, addressed to Mrs. Brennan, dated 3 weeks ago. Your assistance has been most valuable. The information you've provided about His Grace's declining influence has been instrumental in our planning. Continue to document any weaknesses, particularly regarding the new Duchess. We expect she'll provide ample opportunity for embarrassment. The payment discussed will be delivered as agreed. Ensure the household remains unstable. P. Elara read it twice, her stomach sinking with each word. Mrs. Brennan hadn't just been stealing. She'd been actively working to sabotage the estate, feeding information to someone. Someone identified only as P about Blackthorne's vulnerabilities. Someone who was paying her to create chaos. Someone who wanted the duchy to fail. And Elara had just sent the only person who knew who P was out of the house before finding this letter. She ran, down hallways, through the entrance hall, out into the darkening evening where Mrs. Brennan's carriage had just disappeared around the curve of the drive. Too late. She was gone. Blackthorne appeared at Elara's shoulder, drawn by her sudden flight. "What's wrong?" Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. His face went very still as he read. When he looked up, his expression was colder than Elara had ever seen it. "It's not just household theft. Someone's been actively working to destroy this estate, and we just lost our only lead to who." They stood together in the gathering dark, the letter between them like evidence of a conspiracy they'd barely begun to understand. Somewhere out there, someone was orchestrating their downfall. Someone with resources, connections, and intimate knowledge of their weaknesses. And they'd just made the mistake of confronting Mrs. Brennan before they knew the full scope of what they were facing. The letter felt like poison in Blackthorne's hands. "P," he said quietly, staring at the single initial. "Pemberton. Has to be. Which Pemberton?" Elara's mind raced through possibilities. The timber merchant who was at dinner? Or the older one from London who made that comment about my fortunate timing? Could be either. Could be both. Father and son working together. Blackthorne turned the letter over, examining the paper itself. Expensive stationery, watermark from a London printer. Whoever this is has money and connections. Enough to pay Mrs. Brennan for years of sabotage. Apparently, he folded the letter carefully. We need to find out which Pemberton, what they're planning, and who else is involved. Because this... He tapped the paper. This isn't just about household theft. This is someone actively trying to destroy the duchy. Elara's exhaustion was replaced by a different kind of energy. Sharp, focused, angry. Then we find them, and we destroy them first. Blackthorne looked at her with something that might have been approval or concern, possibly both. You realize what you're suggesting. Going after someone powerful enough to orchestrate this kind of long-term sabotage won't be subtle. We'll be declaring open war. They declared war first. We're just finally fighting back. Fair point. He moved toward the house, Elara following. We'll need help. Lady Catherine is still here. She has intelligence networks that would make the Foreign Office jealous. And we need to secure the household before whoever P is makes another move. They found Lady Catherine in the drawing room, reading correspondence by lamplight. She looked up when they entered, took one glance at their faces, and set down her letters. What happened? Blackthorne handed her the letter. She read it twice, her expression growing progressively darker. Well, she said finally. This explains several things, including why there's been so much gossip about your declining influence, Rowan. Someone's been feeding society very specific information designed to make you look weak. Mrs. Brennan, Elara said. She's been documenting everything and sending reports. For how long? At least several months based on that letter's date, possibly years. Blackthorne paced, agitated. The question is who's receiving them and what they plan to do with the information. Lady Catherine tapped the letter thoughtfully. P. In London society, that could be any number of people. Pemberton is obvious, but there's also Lord Pritchard, the Earl of Portsmouth, even Lady Penelope Ashford, though she typically uses her full name, Ashford. Elara's stomach dropped. Caroline Ashford's family, the ones I just publicly humiliated, which would give them excellent motivation for revenge. Lady Catherine's eyes gleamed. This is getting interesting. Rowan, do you have any enemies who might collaborate with the Ashfords? Dozens. The duchy controls resources that others want. Shipping routes, mining rights, agricultural contracts. Any of them could be worth destroying me for. He stopped pacing. But coordinating this kind of long-term sabotage requires patience and significant capital. That narrows the field. The Pembertons have both, Elara said quietly. The son was nervous at dinner, kept checking the clock. And he's in financial trouble, according to kitchen gossip. What if he's being bankrolled by someone else, someone using him as a front? Lady Catherine looked impressed. That's surprisingly devious thinking for someone who's only been a duchess for 2 weeks. I've had excellent teachers in manipulation recently. Elara didn't smile. If the younger Pemberton is the front man, who's backing him? Let me make some inquiries. Lady Catherine stood, gathering her correspondence. I can have answers within days. I know which society matrons owe me favors, and they know everything worth knowing. But in the meantime, you need to secure this estate. If they've lost their inside source, they'll try other methods. What kind of methods? Economic pressure, calling in debts or blocking trade agreements, social destruction through targeted gossip, or her expression turned grim. If they're desperate enough, more direct action. Accidents happen, especially on large estates with dangerous equipment. The implication hung in the air like smoke. They wouldn't, Elara said, but her voice lacked conviction. They absolutely would, Blackthorne said flatly. If the stakes are high enough, we need to assume the worst and prepare accordingly. Lady Catherine moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. My gathering in London is in 3 weeks. If you're going to strike back, that's your opportunity. Every important person in society will be there. Control the narrative there, and you control everything. After she left, Elara sank into a chair, suddenly overwhelmed. 3 weeks to find out who's trying to destroy us, rebuild a household without a head housekeeper, prepare for a major social event, and somehow survive whatever they try next. That's impossible. Probably. Blackthorne pulled a decanter from the sideboard, poured 2 glasses of whiskey. He handed one to Elara. But we don't have a choice. Drink. It helps. She drank. The whiskey burned going down, but he was right. It helped. What do we do first? First, we make this household defensible. That means finding a new housekeeper we can trust, which means looking outside the county where P doesn't have influence. Second, we audit every contract and agreement the estate has, find out where we're vulnerable economically. Third, he took a long drink. We set a trap, make them think they're winning, then use it against them. What kind of trap? I'm still working that out, but it'll need to be something they can't resist. He studied her over the rim of his glass. You're handling this better than I expected. What were you expecting? Tears and hysterics? Honestly, yes. Most people would have collapsed by now. I'm too angry to collapse. It was true. Beneath the exhaustion and fear, rage burned steady and hot. Someone has been systematically trying to destroy you, destroy us, for months, maybe years. They used my humiliation as an opportunity. They're probably celebrating right now, thinking they've won, and I'm not going to let them. Something shifted in Blackthorne's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Then we won't. The next morning, Elara woke to find Anne practically vibrating with anxiety outside her door. Your Grace, I'm so sorry to wake you, but there's a situation in the kitchens and Mrs. Patterson is threatening to quit and the footmen are arguing about who's in charge of the household now that Mrs. Brennan is gone and, breathe, Anne, Elara threw on a dressing gown. Show me. The kitchen was chaos. Mrs. Patterson stood in the center, arms crossed, glaring at 2 footmen who were arguing loudly about meal service procedures. Other servants watched from the periphery, clearly uncertain what to do without Mrs. Brennan's iron control. Enough! Elara's voice cut through the arguing. Everyone turned to stare at her. What's the problem? The problem, Your Grace, Mrs. Patterson said with barely controlled frustration, is that no one knows who's in charge anymore. Mrs. Brennan managed everything, schedules, supplies, staff assignments. Without her, we're drowning. Then we'll figure it out. Elara moved to the kitchen table, which was covered in papers and abandoned breakfast preparations. Mrs. Patterson, you manage the kitchen. That doesn't change. Graves, you manage the public-facing service. Also unchanged. What we need is someone to coordinate between departments and handle supplies and accounts. Until we hire a new head housekeeper, I'll do it. The servants exchanged glances of pure disbelief. Your Grace, Graves said carefully, that's not typically. I don't care what's typical. We have a household to run and no one in charge of running it. So either I step in temporarily or we collapse into chaos and prove everyone right about me being incompetent." She looked around the kitchen, meeting eyes. "I know most of you are scared. Mrs. Brennan was here for decades, and I've been here less than a month. But she was also stealing from this estate and sabotaging its operations. So yes, she's gone. And yes, things will be different. But different doesn't mean worse." "Begging your pardon, Your Grace," one of the footmen said hesitantly. "But none of us know how to do her job. She kept everything in her head, never trained anyone." "Then we'll learn together, starting now." Elara pulled paper toward her. "Mrs. Patterson, what do you need for today's meals?" The cook blinked. "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly." "You can, and you will. List what you need." Graves, same question. "What supplies or support do you need for the household to function today?" Slowly, hesitantly, they began answering. Elara wrote everything down, organized it into categories, assigned tasks. It was improvisation held together with determination, but it was something. The servants watched her with expressions ranging from skeptical to cautiously hopeful. By noon, they had a functioning system. Barely, but functioning. Elara retreated to what had been Mrs. Brennan's office, now hers apparently, and stared at the mountain of ledgers and papers the housekeeper had left behind. 30 years of institutional knowledge, all organized according to a system only Mrs. Brennan understood. "You look like you're contemplating murder." She looked up to find Blackthorne in the doorway, holding more papers. "Just considering arson, burning all of this and starting fresh. Tempting, but we need the records for the investigation." He set down his stack. "These are the estate contracts I mentioned. I've been going through them, looking for vulnerabilities. Found several." "How bad?" "Bad enough. We have 3 major agreements that come up for renewal in the next 2 months. Timber sales to the Pembertons, shipping contracts with Portsmouth Lines, and a mining equipment lease from Pritchard Industrial. If all 3 refuse to renew, we lose income and operations simultaneously." "Exactly. Which means we're vulnerable to coordinated economic attack." He pulled out a chair, sat heavily. "And if P has been planning this for years, they've probably positioned themselves to strike precisely when we're weakest." Elara studied the contracts, her mind working through possibilities. What if we don't wait for them to strike? What if we renegotiate now before they can coordinate? They'll refuse. They're waiting for leverage. Then we find different partners. New contracts that make us less dependent on anyone conspiring against us. She was thinking out loud now, pieces clicking together. "The timber. We've been selling only to Pemberton, right? What if we diversified? Found buyers in other regions?" "That takes time we don't have. It takes one good connection. One buyer willing to offer better terms." She looked up at him. "Lady Catherine's gathering. There will be merchants there, foreign buyers, people looking for opportunities. What if we use the gathering not just for social rehabilitation, but for business?" Blackthorne's expression shifted from skeptical to considering. "That's actually not terrible. If we can secure new contracts before the old ones expire, we eliminate their leverage. But we'd need to negotiate fast, and we'd need to do it without tipping our hand. Can we? If we're smart about it, and lucky." He stood, gathering the contracts. "I'll start identifying potential buyers. You focus on keeping this household from imploding. We'll coordinate in London." Blackthorne. She stopped him before he could leave. "Why are they doing this? What's the end game? If they destroy the duchy, what do they gain?" He was quiet for a moment. "Control of resources, most likely. If we fail, our contracts and holdings get sold or redistributed. Whoever's positioned to buy them up gets a massive windfall. It's not personal. It's just business. Extremely ruthless business. But they used my wedding, used my humiliation. Because it was convenient. You were a tool, not a target." He said it matter-of-factly, but something in his expression suggested he understood why that made it worse somehow. "The question is whether you let that define you, or use it." After he left, Elara sat in the quiet office, surrounded by evidence of corruption and conspiracy. She thought about Marcus Ashford stealing her dowry, about standing at that altar alone, about every person who'd looked at her with pity or contempt. They'd all underestimated her, treated her like collateral damage in their larger schemes. Time to show them exactly how wrong they were. The next 2 weeks were a blur of controlled chaos. Elara threw herself into managing the household with obsessive focus, learning systems by trial and error, making mistakes and fixing them, slowly earning the cautious respect of servants who'd initially thought she was insane for trying. Anne became her informal assistant, running messages and gathering information from the servant network. The girl had a gift for hearing things, who was worried about what, where tensions were building, which servants were still loyal to Mrs. Brennan's memory, and which were relieved she was gone. Thomas got another letter from his aunt, Anne reported one evening while helping Elara dress for dinner. With more money. Turns out she really did sell her cottage. So he wasn't stealing. No, Your Grace, and he's telling everyone you saved him from being fired unjustly. You're getting a reputation in the servants' hall. For what? For being fair. Fierce, but fair. Anne smiled slightly. It's better than the alternative. Elara wondered what the alternative had been. Probably incompetent, or tyrant, or some combination that confirmed all their worst expectations. She'd take fierce and fair. Lady Catherine departed after her 3-night stay with promises to send information as soon as she had it. 2 days later, a letter arrived with her findings, delivered by private courier. Elara read it in Blackthorne's study while he reviewed shipping manifests. Listen to this, she said. The younger Pemberton is indeed in financial distress, gambling debts exceeding £5,000. However, his timber operation remains solvent due to regular infusions of capital from an unknown source. Society rumors suggest involvement with the Ashford family, though no direct connection has been proven. Unknown source. Blackthorne set down his papers. Meaning someone's hiding their involvement carefully. It gets better. Lord Pritchard of Pritchard Industrial has been quietly buying up mining equipment leases throughout the north, positioning himself to monopolize the market. If Blackthorne's mining operations fail, he's positioned to acquire them at significant discount. Then she writes, the Earl of Portsmouth has been unusually interested in shipping route negotiations, specifically those controlled by the Blackthorne Duchy. Draw your own conclusions. So we have 3 separate players, all positioned to benefit if we fail. Blackthorne's expression was grim. The question is whether they're coordinating or just opportunistic. Does it matter? Either way, they're circling like vultures. It matters because coordinated attack is easier to defend against than opportunistic chaos. If they're working together, they have to communicate. Communication can be intercepted, manipulated, used against them. He stood, pacing. But if they're just individually exploiting our weakness, we have to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously. Elara thought about the letter, about Mrs. Brennan's reports, about Caroline Ashford appearing at the gathering with that poisonous smile. They're coordinating, she said with sudden certainty. The timing is too perfect otherwise. Mrs. Brennan feeding information, the contracts all coming due simultaneously, the social pressure ramping up exactly when we're most vulnerable. Someone's conducting this orchestra. Then we need to find the conductor. The answer came from an unexpected source 3 days later. Elara was in the office, wrestling with supply orders, when Anne rushed in looking frightened. Your Grace, there's someone here to see you. She wouldn't give her name, but she says it's urgent, and it's about Mrs. Brennan. Elara found a woman waiting in the servants' entrance, middle-aged, well-dressed, but not ostentatious, with the careful posture of someone used to being dismissed. Your Grace, she curtsied. My name is Helen Marsh. I was Mrs. Brennan's sister. That got Elara's attention. Was? We haven't spoken in 15 years. Not since I questioned her methods, and she cut me out of her life completely. Helen's hands twisted together. But I heard she left Blackthorne Hall, and I thought you should know what she's planning. They moved to a private parlor. Helen accepted tea, but didn't drink it, too nervous. My sister is not a forgiving woman, she began, and she doesn't lose gracefully. I know she's been working with someone, I don't know who, to undermine this estate. She bragged about it last year when she was drunk at our mother's funeral, said she'd found a way to ensure her comfortable retirement by making herself invaluable to someone powerful. Did she say who? No, but she did say it involved bringing down the arrogant Duke who thought he was untouchable. Helen met Elara's eyes. That would be your husband, Your Grace. Why are you telling me this? Because Margaret, Mrs. Brennan, she's planning something for Lady Catherine's gathering in London. I don't know what, but she was very smug about it. said it would finish what was started and prove the Duchess was exactly the disaster everyone suspected. Helen's voice dropped. I may hate my sister, but I don't hate innocent people being destroyed. You should know what's coming. Elara's mind raced. Do you know anything else? Any details? Only that it involves someone named Pemberton and something about contracts. Helen shook her head. I'm sorry I can't be more specific. But Your Grace, be careful. Margaret is vicious when she feels wronged, and she feels very wronged by you. After Helen left, Elara found Blackthorne in the stables, reviewing breeding records with the stable master. She pulled him aside. We have a problem. Mrs. Brennan is planning something for London. She relayed everything Helen had told her. Blackthorne's expression grew progressively darker. Finish what was started, he repeated. That suggests the gathering is meant to be an endgame. Everything up to now has been positioning. For what? For public humiliation on a scale that destroys credibility permanently. He was thinking out loud now. If they can engineer a scandal at Lady Catherine's gathering, the most important social event of the season, with every influential person in attendance, they don't just damage our reputation, they make it impossible to recover. So we don't go. Then we look weak and they win by default. No, we go, but we go prepared. His eyes had that dangerous gleam Elara was learning to recognize. We know they're planning something. That's an advantage. We can set our own trap, use their expectations against them. How? By giving them exactly what they think they want. Let them believe their plan is working, then turn it around at the critical moment. He gripped her shoulders, intense. But I need to know. Are you willing to go through public humiliation again? Because that's what this will require. You'll have to appear vulnerable, let them think they're winning, until we spring the trap. Elara thought about standing at that altar alone, about the whispers and pitying looks and cruel laughter, about doing it again, deliberately this time, as bait. What's the end game? She asked. If we do this, what do we gain? Everything. Exposure of the conspiracy, destruction of their credibility, proof that you're not the weakness they think you are. But only if it works. If it fails, we're finished. Yes, she should refuse, should insist on a safer plan, should not willingly walk into another public humiliation, even with the promise of eventual vindication. I'll do it, she heard herself say. Tell me the plan. They spent hours strategizing. The plan was audacious, risky, and required perfect timing. They'd need allies in London, coordination with Lady Catherine, and ironclad evidence to deploy at the right moment. The contracts, Blackthorne said, pulling out the documents they'd been reviewing. If we can prove the Pembertons have been deliberately sabotaging our operations while negotiating with our competitors, that's actionable fraud. But we need documentation. Mrs. Brennan's records. Elara's mind clicked into place. She documented everything. If she was reporting to Pemberton, there might be copies of correspondence in her files. They tore through the office, searching methodically. Hours passed. The sun set. Servants came and went with lamps and concerned looks. Here. Elara pulled a folder from behind a false back in one of the desk drawers. Letters, dozens of them. They read by lamplight, piecing together months of conspiracy. Mrs. Brennan had indeed been working with the younger Pemberton, feeding him information about estate operations, contract negotiations, even personal details about Blackthorne's daily schedule. The letters referenced payments, strategy discussions, and most damningly, coordination with Lord P and the Ashford interests. This is it, Blackthorne breathed. This proves everything: conspiracy to defraud, deliberate sabotage, possibly even criminal theft on a massive scale. But we can't just present this at the gathering. They'll deny it, claim the letters are forgeries. No, we need something more immediate, something undeniable. He thought for a moment. The contracts. If we can get Pemberton to confirm his involvement publicly, record him admitting to the sabotage, that becomes proof no one can deny. How do we do that? We make him desperate. Force him into a position where he has to choose between confessing and protecting whoever's backing him. Blackthorne's smile was sharp. And I think I know exactly how. The next week, Blackthorne sent carefully worded letters to all their major contract partners, politely requesting renegotiation meetings to be held in London during Lady Catherine's gathering week. The letters were professionally neutral, giving no hint of suspicion or urgency. But to people who'd been waiting for the duchy to fail, they would read as desperation. "They'll think we're trying to salvage failing agreements," Blackthorne explained, "which means they'll come to London expecting to dictate terms from a position of strength. That's when we turn the tables." "By offering what?" "Better terms than they expect. Contracts with foreign buyers Lady Catherine is arranging. Agreements that make their sabotage irrelevant." He showed her the proposals he'd been drafting. "If we can demonstrate that we've already secured alternative arrangements, their leverage disappears. And desperate people make mistakes." Elara studied the proposals. They were aggressive, favorable to new partners, and would require significant restructuring of estate operations. But they would work. "This is brilliant," she said slowly, "but it requires everything going perfectly. If even one piece fails, we're prepared for that too. We have contingencies, backup plans, and if absolutely necessary, we retreat and fight another day." He looked at her seriously. "But I don't think it'll come to that. I think they're overconfident. They think they've won already. That's their weakness." The week before the London trip, something shifted in the household. The servants had grown accustomed to Elara's direct management style, had stopped jumping every time she entered a room. They started bringing problems to her instead of trying to solve everything themselves, started treating her like someone who actually belonged there. Mrs. Patterson even smiled at her one morning, a real smile, not just professional courtesy. "You're doing well, Your Grace," the cook said, approving Elara's menu selections. "Better than Mrs. Brennan in some ways. You listen to people." It was a small thing, but it felt like victory. Anne helped Elara pack for London, chattering nervously about the gathering. "Everyone's talking about it in the servants' hall, Your Grace. They say half of London society will be there, that it's the most important event of the season." No pressure then. Elara tried to keep her voice light, but her stomach was churning. In 3 days, she'd be walking into the lion's den, voluntarily. "You'll be magnificent, Your Grace. I know you will." Elara wished she had Anne's confidence. The journey to London was tense. Blackthorne spent most of it reviewing papers and strategies, preparing for the meetings he'd arranged. Elara tried to sleep but kept jolting awake, her mind spinning through everything that could go wrong. They arrived 2 days before the gathering itself, taking up residence in the London townhouse that served as the duchy's city headquarters. It was smaller than Blackthorne Hall, but still impressive, formal, and imposing in a very London way. Lady Catherine visited that first evening, bringing intelligence and gossip in equal measure. "The anticipation is delicious," she reported, settled in the drawing room with tea. "Everyone's speculating about what you'll do. The betting pools at the clubs are running heavily against you, which is excellent. Nothing society loves more than being proven wrong." "Assuming we prove them wrong," Elara muttered. "You will. I have faith." Lady Catherine's eyes gleamed. "I've also arranged for 3 potential contract partners to attend the gathering specifically to meet with Rowan. Foreign merchants all interested in long-term agreements for timber and mining. If your negotiations go well, you'll have alternatives in place before the current contracts expire." "And the Pembertons?" "Both will be there. Father and son. I've made sure of it. Sent personal invitations they couldn't refuse without looking suspicious." She paused. "I also heard from a mutual friend that Mrs. Brennan has been seen in London, meeting with various people. She's definitely planning something." "Let her plan," Blackthorne said quietly. "We're ready." The night before the gathering, Elara couldn't sleep. She stood at the window of her room, looking out at London's glittering darkness, thinking about everything that had brought her here. 2 months ago, she'd been standing at an altar, abandoned and humiliated. Now she was preparing to walk into a room full of society's most powerful people and somehow convince them she was worth their respect. It was insane, impossible, and absolutely necessary. A soft knock at her door. Blackthorne stood in the hallway, still dressed, looking as sleepless as she felt. "Can't rest either?" he asked. "Too much thinking." "Same." He hesitated, then said, "May I come in? We should talk through tomorrow one more time." They sat in her sitting room, going over the plan for the 100th time. Who would be there, what to expect, how to respond to different scenarios. It was tactical and strategic and utterly devoid of emotion, which somehow made it easier to handle. "You'll be fine," he said finally. "Better than fine. You've handled everything else that's been thrown at you. This is just one more performance. What if I fail? What if I freeze or say the wrong thing? Or then we adapt. But you won't fail, Elara. You're too stubborn for that. He said it like a compliment. The woman who confronted Mrs. Brennan and threw out Caroline Ashford and rebuilt a household from scratch, that woman doesn't freeze under pressure. That woman is terrified. Being terrified and being capable aren't mutually exclusive. You can be both. He stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I'm glad it was you. At that altar. I know I trapped you into this marriage, manipulated circumstances to force your hand, but I'm still glad it was you. He left before she could respond. Elara sat in the quiet room, his words echoing. She'd been so focused on survival, on proving herself, on fighting back against everyone trying to destroy them, that she hadn't stopped to consider what was building between her and Blackthorne. Not love. They barely knew each other, and what they did know was forged in crisis rather than choice. But partnership, maybe. Understanding. The kind of alliance that came from fighting the same battles. It wasn't what she'd dreamed of standing at that first altar, but it might be something better. Lady Catherine's gathering was everything Elara had feared and more. The ballroom glittered with wealth and power, crystal chandeliers, elaborate decorations, and what looked like half of London society packed into elegant chaos. Elara wore deep sapphire silk that brought out her eyes, her grandmother's diamonds at her throat, and an expression of perfect composure that hid the screaming panic underneath. Blackthorne stood beside her as they were announced, his hand at her elbow, steady and grounding. "Breathe," he murmured. "You look magnificent. Make them see it." They descended into the crowd like divers entering deep water. The first hour was a gauntlet of careful conversations. People who'd witnessed her abandonment now watching to see if she'd crumble under scrutiny. Others who'd heard about the Ashford confrontation, curious whether she was actually as fierce as rumored. And everywhere, the weight of judgment and speculation. Lord Pemberton, the elder, approached with his son trailing behind. "Your Grace, Duchess, how delightful to see you both." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I trust you received my response to your request for contract renegotiation?" "I did." Blackthorne's tone was neutral, though I was surprised by some of your proposed terms. "Market conditions change, Your Grace. One must adapt." Pemberton's gaze slid to Elara. "I'm sure the Duchess understands the importance of adaptability." The emphasis made it clear he knew about her circumstances, was probably counting on them. "I'm learning quickly," Elara said pleasantly. "In fact, we've been exploring several alternative arrangements that might better serve our interests." Something flickered in Pemberton's expression. Surprise? Concern? Alternative arrangements? "With international partners, diversification seems prudent given current uncertainties." She smiled. "But I'm sure we'll find mutually beneficial solutions." They moved on before Pemberton could respond, leaving him looking unsettled. "That was perfect," Blackthorne murmured. "You just let him know we're not desperate. Watch. He'll scramble to meet with us now, worried about losing the contract entirely." Sure enough, within an hour, the younger Pemberton approached requesting a private meeting to discuss terms more flexibly. The trap was working, but so apparently was Mrs. Brennan's plan. Midway through the evening, Caroline Ashford appeared with a cluster of society ladies, all of them looking at Elara with barely concealed anticipation. "Duchess Blackthorne," Caroline purred, "how brave of you to attend tonight. After everything, I mean. So many people watching, waiting to see if you'll manage to maintain your composure. It must be exhausting, all that performing." The cruelty was surgical, designed to cut deep. Around them, conversations quieted as people turned to watch. This was it. The moment Mrs. Brennan had probably orchestrated, public humiliation designed to shatter Elara's credibility. She could retreat, deflect, make excuses and flee, or she could fight. "You're absolutely right, Miss Ashford," Elara said clearly, her voice carrying. "It is exhausting. Performing grace while people like you try to destroy me because your brother stole my dowry and humiliated me publicly. Pretending not to notice when conspiracy and sabotage are disguised as polite society. Yes, it's terribly exhausting." Caroline's smile faltered. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Elara pulled the folder from her reticule, the letters they'd found, carefully selected excerpts. Because I have correspondence here suggesting otherwise. Letters between your family and certain other parties discussing how to exploit the Blackthorne weakness and ensure the Duchess's failure. Should I read them aloud? Or would you prefer to explain privately how your family has been coordinating with the Pembertons to sabotage my husband's estate? The ballroom went silent. Caroline's face drained of color. Around them, society's elite leaned in, hungry for scandal. Lord Pemberton pushed through the crowd, his expression furious. Those letters are private correspondence. You have no right. I have every right to defend myself against conspiracy and fraud. Elara held up the papers. These prove coordinated sabotage extending back months, deliberate interference with contracts, theft of proprietary information, and planned economic destruction, all documented in your own words. This is outrageous. The elder Pemberton was shaking with rage or fear. You can't prove— Actually, Lady Catherine's voice cut through the chaos. I believe she can. I've had my own investigators looking into this matter, and they've confirmed several irregularities in your business dealings, Lord Pemberton, including payments to a certain former housekeeper for information about the Blackthorne estate. Blackthorne stepped forward, his voice carrying cold authority. I'm prepared to bring formal charges of fraud and conspiracy, but I'm willing to settle this privately. If you withdraw from all Blackthorne contracts immediately and provide full documentation of your involvement. Refuse, and this becomes a legal matter that will destroy your reputations permanently. The ballroom held its collective breath. Pemberton looked at his son, at the Ashfords, at the crowd of witnesses. His face went through several expressions: rage, panic, calculation. This isn't over, he said finally, his voice shaking. Yes, Elara said quietly. It is. He turned and left, his son scrambling after him. Caroline and her family followed, their exit swift and humiliated. The crowd erupted into excited chatter. Lady Catherine appeared at Elara's elbow, her smile sharp with satisfaction. Well, that was more entertaining than I'd anticipated. You just destroyed 3 powerful families in under 10 minutes. How do you feel? Elara realized her hands were shaking. Terrified. Did that actually just happen? It did, and everyone saw it. Lady Catherine's expression softened slightly. You just changed the entire narrative, my dear. You're not the woman who ruined a duke anymore. You're the woman who exposed conspiracy and fought back. That's a very different story. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of people wanting to speak with her, some offering genuine congratulations, others clearly reassessing their previous judgments. Merchants approached Blackthorne about contracts. Society matrons who'd previously snubbed her now sought introduction. By the time they left, well past midnight, Elara felt like she'd fought a battle and somehow won. In the carriage returning to the townhouse, she finally let herself feel it. The fear, the adrenaline, the disbelief that she'd actually pulled it off. You were incredible, Blackthorne said quietly. That moment when you pulled out the letters, I've never seen anyone control a room like that. I thought I was going to vomit. You didn't show it. You looked powerful, dangerous. He smiled. Exactly what I needed. We needed, Elara corrected. This was both of us. Yes, it was. He said it like a realization. We make a good team. They did. Somehow, impossibly, the marriage forced on her in desperation had become a partnership forged in shared battles. It wasn't the romance she'd dreamed of. But looking at Blackthorne's rare, genuine smile, Elara thought it might be something better. The morning after Lady Catherine's gathering, London's gossip networks were on fire. Elara woke to find Anne practically bouncing with excitement, carrying a stack of newspapers and hand-delivered notes. Your Grace, you have to see these. The maid spread papers across the bed. Everyone's talking about what happened last night. Listen to this. The Duchess Blackthorne's stunning exposure of the Pemberton-Ashford conspiracy has left society reeling. What was meant to be her social execution became instead a masterclass in strategic retaliation. Elara sat up, scanning the headlines. The Morning Chronicle, the London Times, even the scandal sheets, all of them covering the confrontation with varying degrees of accuracy and embellishment. Sources close to the investigation suggest the conspiracy extended far beyond simple business rivalry, she read aloud. Former household staff have come forward with evidence of systematic sabotage dating back years. The question now is not whether Duchess Blackthorne weakened her husband's position, but whether she saved it from complete destruction. That's the best one, Anne said, pointing to the social observer. But this one's good too. Lady Catherine Verne's sponsorship of the young Duchess appears vindicated. Those who bet against Elara Blackthorne have learned an expensive lesson about underestimating determined women. Blackthorne appeared in the doorway, already dressed, looking like he'd been awake for hours. The contract meetings start in an hour. Are you ready? Elara threw off the covers. Give me 30 minutes. The meetings were held in a private room Lady Catherine had secured at her London residence. One by one, the foreign merchants she'd arranged came through. A Dutch timber buyer, a French mining equipment manufacturer, and a Portuguese shipping magnate, all interested in long-term agreements with the Blackthorne Duchy. Elara sat beside Blackthorne through each negotiation, no longer just observing but actively participating. She'd spent weeks learning the estate's operations, studying the contracts, understanding what they needed. Now she used that knowledge. Your proposed timeline is aggressive, she told the Dutch buyer, reviewing his terms. But we can meet it if you're willing to commit to exclusive rights for the northern forests. That gives us guaranteed income and you guaranteed supply. The merchant looked surprised at being addressed directly by the Duchess, then intrigued. Exclusive rights would require better pricing on our end. Agreed, but it also eliminates your competition and gives you market control. That's worth the investment. She slid across revised numbers she'd calculated that morning. These terms benefit both parties long term. After a moment's consideration, the Dutch buyer nodded. You drive a hard bargain, Your Grace. I accept. By noon, they'd secured 3 new contracts, all with better terms than the old Pemberton agreements, all with partners who had no connection to the conspiracy against them. You were brilliant in there, Blackthorne said after the last merchant departed. Where did you learn to negotiate like that? Desperation and spite are excellent teachers. Elara gathered the signed contracts, still hardly believing they'd pulled it off. What about the Pembertons? Will they actually withdraw from the old agreements? They don't have a choice. Lady Catherine made sure the right magistrates received copies of those letters. If they don't withdraw quietly, they'll face criminal prosecution for fraud. His expression was satisfied in a cold way. They're finished. Socially, financially, legally. It'll take them years to recover, if they ever do. Good. Elara felt no guilt about it. They'd tried to destroy everything, had actively worked to ruin the estate, humiliate her, weaken Blackthorne. They deserved what they got. A knock at the door. Lady Catherine entered, carrying more correspondence and looking pleased with herself. You've made quite the impression, my dear. I have 17 invitations here for you. Dinner parties, charity events, salon gatherings. Everyone wants the Duchess who exposed a conspiracy at their next function. 17? Elara stared at the stack. 2 days ago, most of these people wouldn't speak to me. 2 days ago, they thought you were weak. Now they know better. Lady Catherine sorted through the invitations. You'll want to accept selectively, appear at enough events to cement your position, but not so many that you seem desperate for validation. I suggest the Worthington dinner, Lady Sheffield's charity auction, and perhaps the opera next Thursday. What about returning to Blackthorne Hall? Elara looked at Blackthorne. We still have an estate to manage. The estate has survived this long without us. A few more weeks won't hurt. He considered the invitations. Lady Catherine's right. We need to consolidate what we've won here before retreating. Make sure the new narrative is firmly established. So they stayed in London, navigating a social landscape that had transformed overnight. People who'd pitied Elara now sought her advice. Women who'd gossiped about her failure now wanted to know how she'd orchestrated such a spectacular reversal. Men who'd dismissed her as insignificant now addressed her with wary respect. It was intoxicating and exhausting in equal measure. At the Worthington dinner, 3 nights later, Elara found herself cornered by a group of society wives, all asking pointed questions disguised as innocent curiosity. How did you know about the conspiracy? Lady Worthington asked. Surely you didn't uncover all that evidence yourself. I had help, Elara said carefully. But yes, I did much of the investigation personally. When your household is being sabotaged, you notice things. But how did you know where to look? Another woman pressed. Most women wouldn't think to audit accounts or question their staff. Most women aren't married to men whose enemies want to destroy them. Elara kept her tone light, but the truth underneath was sharp. I learned quickly that survival meant paying attention to details everyone else ignored. Still, Lady Morrison, a different one from the country thankfully, said thoughtfully, It took remarkable courage to confront the Pembertons publicly like that. You could have been wrong, could have humiliated yourself terribly. I was already humiliated, standing at an altar, abandoned, while 200 people watched. Elara met her gaze directly. After that, confronting some corrupt nobles at a party didn't seem nearly as frightening. The women exchanged glances, reassessing. Lady Worthington smiled slightly. "You're not what I expected, Your Grace." "Good. I'm tired of meeting expectations." Word of that conversation spread, as everything did in London society. By the end of the week, Elara had acquired a reputation as someone formidable, not just rescued by a powerful husband, but powerful in her own right. It was exactly what she'd wanted, so why did it feel hollow? She was standing on the townhouse balcony late one evening, watching London's lights, when Blackthorne found her. "You looked miserable at dinner tonight," he said, joining her at the railing, despite being the center of attention. "I'm tired of performing, of being watched and judged and evaluated constantly." Elara stared out at the darkness. "We won. We exposed the conspiracy, secured new contracts, rebuilt my reputation. So why does it feel like I'm still trapped? Because winning the battle isn't the same as winning the war." He was quiet for a moment. "You've proven you're not weak, but you haven't proven you're more than just a reaction to what happened to you. That's what's missing." He was right. Everything she'd done, confronting Mrs. Brennan, exposing the Pembertons, rebuilding the household, had been defensive. Survival rather than ambition. Reaction rather than action. "What's the difference," she asked, "between surviving and actually winning?" "Surviving is staying alive. Winning is changing the rules so you can't be put in that position again." He turned to face her. "You've survived brilliantly, but if you want to actually win, to be powerful rather than just not weak, you need to build something that's yours. Not mine, not ours. Yours." "Like what?" "That's for you to decide, but I'll tell you this. Watching you negotiate those contracts, manage the household, take apart the conspiracy piece by piece, you're capable of far more than just being a duchess. The question is what you want to do with that capability." He left her there with the question hanging in the night air. What did she want? Not just security or respect or vindication for past humiliation. Those were important, but Blackthorne was right. They were reactive, defensive. What did she actually want to build? The answer came 2 days later from an unexpected source. Elara was reviewing estate reports, a habit she'd maintained even in London, when she noticed something in the agricultural data. The tenant farms they'd implemented cover crops on were showing improved yields, but the tenant farmers themselves were still struggling financially. Better crops didn't automatically mean better lives. She found herself thinking about Anne's father, killed in a mine accident, about Thomas the footman, nearly fired for money his aunt had legitimately sent him, about the dozens of servants who'd been trapped in Mrs. Brennan's system of corruption because they had no other options, about how the duchy's wealth was built on the labor of people who saw almost none of that prosperity. She took her findings to Blackthorne that evening. "The agricultural improvements are working," she said, spreading her calculations across his desk. "But the tenant farmers are still barely surviving because the lease terms haven't changed in 40 years. They're producing more, we're profiting more, and they're still one bad harvest away from ruin." Blackthorne studied her numbers. "You want to renegotiate the leases. I want to restructure them entirely. Profit sharing instead of fixed rents. Investment in infrastructure that helps them succeed long-term instead of just extracting maximum value short-term." She leaned forward, intense. "We have the capital now from the new contracts. We could actually make a difference. That would cost a fortune and set a precedent every other estate would hate. Their tenants would start demanding similar terms." "Good. Maybe they should." Elara met his eyes. "You asked what I wanted to build. This is it. A system that actually works for the people who depend on it, not just the people who own it." He was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he smiled, genuinely, without calculation. "You want to start a revolution. I want to prove that doing the right thing can also be the profitable thing, that you don't have to choose between being decent and being successful." She gestured at the reports. "These numbers show it can work. The question is whether you're willing to try. The question is whether you're willing to lead it. Because if we do this, it needs to be your project. Your name, your reputation, your success or failure. His expression was serious. I'll back you completely. But this has to be yours. Elara felt something shift inside her, fear and excitement and determination all tangled together. This was it. The thing that would make her more than just the woman who'd survived humiliation and conspiracy, more than just a duchess who'd proven herself capable. This would make her someone who actually changed things. I'm willing, she said. They spent the next week planning. Elara drafted proposals, ran calculations, consulted with agricultural experts Lady Catherine connected her with. The plan was ambitious. Restructured tenant agreements across all Blackthorne holdings, investment in shared infrastructure like grain mills and storage facilities, education programs to help farmers improve techniques. It would cost thousands of pounds up front, but the long-term projections showed increased productivity, more stable income, and tenant farmers who actually prospered rather than just survived. She presented the plan to Blackthorne's advisors in a formal meeting. 3 men in their 50s, all looking skeptical that a duchess barely 3 months into her marriage had opinions on agricultural economics. Your Grace, the senior advisor said carefully, these proposals are radical. Unprecedented, really. No estate in England operates this way. That's because every estate in England is more interested in maintaining tradition than improving outcomes, Elara countered. These numbers don't lie. Prosperous tenants are more productive tenants. Investing in their success increases our long-term revenue. But the upfront costs are covered by the new contracts we secured, which, if you'll recall, came about because we were willing to take risks instead of clinging to failing agreements. She kept her voice professional but firm. I'm not asking permission. I'm informing you of the plan His Grace and I have decided to implement. Your job is to help execute it effectively. The advisors looked at Blackthorne, clearly expecting him to contradict her. He just smiled. You heard the Duchess. Make it happen. After the meeting, the senior advisor pulled Blackthorne aside, not quietly enough to avoid Elara overhearing. Your Grace, I must express concern. The Duchess is very assertive for someone so new to estate management. Perhaps with more experience. Mr. Thornton, Blackthorne interrupted, his voice pleasant but with an edge underneath. My wife has identified an opportunity that could transform our agricultural operations for the better. She's done the research, run the calculations, and presented a viable plan. The only concern I have is whether you're capable of implementing it. Are you? Thornton swallowed. Of course, Your Grace. Good. Then I suggest you focus on that rather than questioning my wife's competence. Elara felt a rush of gratitude, not because she needed Blackthorne to defend her, but because he'd done it without undermining her authority in the process. He'd made it clear the decision was joint, the plan was solid, and questioning her was questioning him. They really were a team now. The implementation began immediately. Letters went out to tenant farmers explaining the new terms. Investment in infrastructure started. Elara herself traveled to several of the larger farms, meeting with the families who worked the land, explaining the changes, answering questions. She'd expected skepticism. What she got was cautious hope mixed with disbelief. Begging your pardon, Your Grace, one old farmer said, but why would you do this? No landowner shares profits with tenants. Because it's good business. You succeed, we succeed. You fail, we lose revenue. So why not invest in helping you succeed? Elara looked around at the assembled families. I know trust has to be earned. So we'll start small. 1-year trial on the new terms. If it works like I think it will, we continue. If it doesn't, we reassess. Fair? They agreed, though she could see the doubt in their faces. They'd been promised things before by landlords who'd never followed through. She'd have to prove herself through results, not words. Back in London, the social landscape continued to shift in unexpected ways. Elara found herself invited not just to society functions, but to actual substantive gatherings, economic discussions, charity planning meetings, political salons where real work happened behind polite conversation. At one such meeting, focused on poverty relief in London's industrial districts, she encountered someone she never expected to see again, Marcus Ashford. He stood across the room, looking diminished somehow, older than he should, with the desperate edge of someone whose life had gone badly wrong. When his eyes met Elara's, genuine fear flickered across his face. She could have ignored him, could have let him slink away into whatever hole he'd crawled out of. Instead, she walked directly to him. Lord Ashford. Her voice was level, giving nothing away. I didn't expect to see you at a charity function. Your Grace. He couldn't quite meet her eyes. I wanted to apologize for what I did. The wedding, the dowry, everything. I was desperate and stupid, and I hurt you terribly. Elara studied him. He looked genuinely wretched, not performing remorse but actually feeling it. It didn't undo anything, didn't erase standing at that altar or the humiliation that followed. But it was something. You were working with your sister, she said quietly, with the Pembertons, part of the conspiracy. No, Caroline approached me after, wanted me to help discredit you, but I refused. I'm many things, Your Grace, but I'm not. He faltered. I stole from you. That's unforgivable. But I never wanted to destroy you. Just wanted the money to pay my debts. And now? Now those debts have destroyed me anyway. My family won't speak to me. Society won't receive me. I lost everything trying to escape ruin and just fell faster. His laugh was bitter. Ironic, really. Elara felt nothing for him. No satisfaction in his downfall, no lingering anger, no desire for revenge. Just nothing. He was irrelevant to her life now. I hope you find a way forward, she said, meaning it distantly. But stay away from me and my family. We're done. She walked away without looking back. Lady Catherine found her shortly after, looking impressed. That was remarkably gracious. Most women would have eviscerated him publicly. Why would I? He's already eviscerated himself. I have more important things to do than nurse grudges against irrelevant men. Elara accepted a glass of wine from a passing servant. Tell me about this poverty relief program you're organizing. I might have some ideas about sustainable employment initiatives. They spent the next hour discussing actual policy, ways to help struggling families, infrastructure investments that created jobs, education programs that gave people options beyond subsistence labor. It was real work, the kind that mattered beyond just surviving or succeeding personally, the kind of work Elara found herself genuinely passionate about. When they finally returned to Blackthorne Hall 6 weeks after the London gathering, it felt like coming home to a place that had fundamentally changed. The household staff greeted them warmly, genuinely, not just professionally. They'd hired a new head housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who'd come highly recommended from a northern estate and had no connections to the old corruption network. Under her management and Elara's oversight, the household had transformed into something functional and, remarkably, pleasant. Welcome home, Your Grace, Mrs. Fletcher said, her smile real. Everything's been prepared for your return. And I should mention, the first tenant farm reports came in. You'll want to see them. Elara barely waited to remove her traveling cloak before diving into the reports. The numbers were preliminary, just the first quarter results, but they were promising. Yields up across the board, tenant income increased. Not dramatically yet, but measurably. It was working. Look at this! She showed Blackthorne the figures, unable to contain her excitement. The Hendersons increased production by 18%, the Clarks by 22%, and their profit margins are actually sustainable now instead of razor thin. I see that. He studied the reports with the same analytical focus he brought to everything. If these trends continue, we'll recoup the infrastructure investment within 3 years and see sustained increased revenue after that, which means we can expand the program, roll it out to more farms, maybe start similar initiatives in the mining operations. You're getting ahead of yourself. But he was smiling. Let's see how the full year goes first. Then we'll discuss expansion. That night, Elara stood at the window of her rooms, the Duchess's chambers that had felt like a mausoleum when she'd first arrived and now felt like hers, looking out at the estate grounds. Somewhere out there were hundreds of people whose lives were slowly improving because of decisions she'd made. Families who were building something sustainable instead of just surviving. It wasn't everything. The world was still full of injustice and cruelty and systems designed to keep people powerless. But it was something, a start. Admiring your kingdom? Blackthorne's voice came from behind her. Thinking about how far we've come. 3 months ago, I was standing at an altar alone, my life in ruins. Now, she gestured at the grounds, the reports on her desk, the evidence of change. Now I'm here, building something that matters. You saved this estate. You know that, right? He moved to stand beside her. When I married you, I thought I was getting a useful tool, someone desperate enough to work hard, smart enough to be helpful. I didn't expect a partner, didn't expect someone who'd see the problems I'd been ignoring and actually solve them. You gave me the opportunity. I gave you the circumstances. You did everything else. He turned to face her fully. I'm not good at this. Emotional honesty, acknowledging what people mean to me. But you should know, you've become essential, not just to the estate, but to me. Elara's breath caught. They'd worked together for months, fought battles side by side, built something significant. But this was different. This was personal. I didn't expect this either, she said quietly. Didn't expect to actually care about you beyond strategic partnership. But somewhere between fighting Mrs. Brennan and exposing conspiracies and restructuring tenant agreements, she smiled slightly. I started looking forward to arguing with you about agricultural policy. That's a terrible sign. He laughed, genuine, unguarded. The worst. What are we going to do about it? Keep going, I suppose. Keep building. Keep fighting whatever tries to tear us down. Keep being dangerous together. I can work with that. He pulled her close, his kiss tasting like promise and partnership, and something that might actually be love, given time. 3 months later, Elara stood before the County Agricultural Society, presenting the results of the tenant farm program to an audience of landowners and estate managers. The auditorium was packed. Word had spread about the Blackthorne initiative, and everyone wanted to see if the radical experiment had succeeded or failed spectacularly. Elara laid out the data with clinical precision: yield increases, tenant income improvements, long-term revenue projections. She addressed every concern, answered every skeptical question, and demonstrated conclusively that treating tenants as partners rather than resources was both ethically sound and financially superior. The old system, she concluded, is built on extraction. Take as much as possible while giving back as little as necessary. It survived for centuries, so we assume it works. But it doesn't. Not sustainably, not morally, and increasingly not economically. The Blackthorne model proves there's a better way, a way that lifts everyone, not just landowners. And I'm here to help any estate willing to try it. The applause was mixed, some enthusiastic, some polite, some conspicuously absent, but it was there. After the presentation, several estate managers approached her about implementing similar programs. Not everyone. Tradition died hard, but enough to matter. You're starting a movement, Lady Catherine observed that evening at a celebratory dinner, whether you intended to or not. Give it 5 years, and half of England's agricultural estates will be using variations of your model. Or they'll find ways to discredit it and maintain the status quo, Elara said, pragmatic. Possibly. But you've proven it works. That's harder to fight than just ideas. Lady Catherine raised her glass. To the woman who went from abandoned bride to agricultural revolutionary, society really should have seen you coming. Blackthorne raised his glass as well. To my wife, who turned a disaster into an empire. Elara felt the weight of what they'd built together, not just the estate improvements or the social rehabilitation, but the actual partnership they'd forged from desperation and necessity. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined standing at that first altar. It was better. Real instead of idealized, earned instead of assumed. To us, she said, meeting Blackthorne's eyes, to falling forward instead of falling apart. 6 months after the agricultural presentation, Elara received a letter from an unexpected source. Your Grace, I write not to beg forgiveness, which I do not deserve, but to inform you of something you deserve to know. The conspiracy against your husband was orchestrated by Lord Pritchard, using the Pembertons and my sister Caroline as fronts. His goal was to acquire Blackthorne mining operations at bankruptcy prices. I provided this information to the magistrates investigating the fraud charges. Pritchard has been arrested. The full extent of his schemes is being revealed. I will never undo the harm I caused you, but perhaps this small justice helps. Marcus Ashford. Elara showed the letter to Blackthorne, who read it with grim satisfaction. Pritchard, I should have known. He's been trying to monopolize northern mining for years. He set down the letter. The magistrates will tear him apart. Between the fraud charges, the sabotage evidence, and now an insider confession, he's finished. Good. Elara felt no sympathy. He tried to destroy everything. He deserves whatever he gets. Agreed. Blackthorne pulled her close. Though I do appreciate the irony, the man who tried to ruin me actually gave me the best thing that ever happened to me. You mean destroying the estate's weaknesses and forcing necessary reforms? I mean you. He said it simply, like fact. Everything else is just bonus. 1 year after her abandonment at the altar, Elara stood in the same chapel where her first wedding had been scheduled. This time it was filled with tenant farmers and estate workers and the people whose lives she'd spent a year improving. No society nobles, no political maneuvering, no performance for witnesses who didn't matter. Just the people who actually cared. Blackthorne stood beside her as they renewed the vows they'd spoken so hastily, so desperately, a year ago. This time, the words meant something different. Not a trap or a rescue, a choice. I didn't think I'd ever stand in a chapel again, Elara said quietly during the simple reception afterward. Not after what happened here. Bad memories? Anne asked, helping serve refreshments to the assembled workers. No, different ones. Elara looked around at the crowd, Mrs. Fletcher chatting with tenant farmers, Thomas the footman laughing with other servants, people from every corner of the estate gathered in genuine celebration. The first time I was here, I thought I was building a life, but I was really just performing a role someone else wrote. This time, she smiled. This time I wrote it myself. Lady Catherine approached, impeccable as always despite the informal setting. You've come absurdly far, my dear. From the abandoned bride everyone pitied to the Duchess everyone respects, possibly fears slightly, and definitely wants to emulate. How does it feel? Exhausting, satisfying, terrifying, all of it at once. Elara accepted a glass of wine. Did you know this is where it would lead when you decided to sponsor me? I knew you had potential. I didn't know you'd exceed it quite so spectacularly. Lady Catherine's smile was proud. Though I'll take credit for recognizing quality when others saw only disaster. As evening fell, Elara found Blackthorne on the chapel steps, looking out at the estate grounds in the fading light. Regretting the impromptu wedding renewal? She asked, joining him. Regretting that it took me a year to realize I'd actually married someone remarkable instead of just useful. He pulled her close. Though I suppose better late than never. Much better. She leaned into him, comfortable in a way that would have seemed impossible a year ago. You know what's strange? I'm grateful for all of it, the abandonment, the forced marriage, even the conspiracy. Without all that, I'd never have become this person, never have built this life. That's either profound wisdom or spectacular rationalization. Can it be both? She smiled up at him. I survived the worst thing I could imagine and discovered I was stronger than I knew. That's worth something. It's worth everything. He kissed her, soft and certain. To falling forward. To falling forward, Elara echoed. 2 years later, the Blackthorne agricultural model had been adopted by 37 estates across England. Elara had written a comprehensive guide to implementation, consulted with dozens of landowners, and become an unlikely authority on sustainable estate management. The woman who'd been abandoned at the altar was now invited to speak at economic conferences, consulted by government officials, and regularly featured in newspapers as an example of innovative thinking. She'd gone from ruin to influence, from blamed to powerful, from the woman who'd supposedly destroyed a duke to the woman who'd rebuilt an empire. And on quiet evenings at Blackthorne Hall, sitting in rooms that now felt like home rather than prison, working on plans to improve more lives, arguing with her husband about expansion strategies while genuinely enjoying the argument, on those evenings, Elara sometimes thought about the girl who'd stood at that altar alone. She wished she could tell her, this isn't the ending. This isn't even the worst part. This is where you become who you were always meant to be. The woman who fell didn't stay down. She learned to fly instead, and the whole world watched her soar. You said, Part 5. Viet sao nghìn đến sao nghìn năm trăm tu, nối trực tiếp từ câu cuối Part 4, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện. Part 5. Viết 6.000 đến 6.500 từ, nối trực tiếp từ câu cuối Part 4, không giới thiệu lại câu chuyện. Ngôi thứ 3, phong cách kể chuyện Mỹ, giống văn giàu cảm xúc, hội thoại 20 đến 25%. Phần này giải quyết hoàn toàn xung đột. Nhân vật chính chứng minh họ đúng, vượt qua hoàn cảnh khắc nghiệt và vị thế của họ thay đổi rõ rệt. Cộng đồng, đối thủ hoặc hệ thống phải thừa nhận sự thật. Tạo một cao trào cuối cùng mạnh mẽ, sau đó chuyển sang kết thúc trọn vẹn, cảm xúc và mang tính biểu tượng hoặc thay đổi cuộc đời nhân vật. Không recap dài dòng, nhân vật không hoàn hảo, hội thoại tự nhiên, tránh ngôn ngữ văn chương sáo rơi và cụm từ AI điển hình. Viết như nhà văn chuyên nghiệp, không như AI cố gắng nghe sang. Có yếu tố con người, cầm miêu tả qua mượt mà và hoàn hảo, không giới thiệu phần sau. Không nhắc đến Chúa, chi đàn bắt buộc, không được xuất hiện trong nội dung truyền. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu được tạo ra chỉ nhằm mục đích giải trí, không đề cập hay ngụ ý rằng nó dựa trên sự kiện có thật, người thật hoặc câu chuyện có thật, không sử dụng các cụm từ như dựa trên một câu chuyện có thật, theo ghi chép hoặc bất cứ điều gì tương tự. Tất cả các nhân vật, địa điểm, tổ chức và sự kiện phải hoàn toàn hư cấu. Show more 1503, Claude responded. Part 5. From Blame to Power. Part 5. From Blame to Power. It wasn't the romance she dreamed of. But looking at Blackthorne's rare, genuine smile, Elara thought it might be something better. The euphoria lasted exactly until they returned to the townhouse and found 2 letters waiting, both sealed with wax that made Elara's stomach drop. The first was from Lord Pritchard himself. Your Grace, congratulations on your theatrical performance at Lady Catherine's gathering. You've won this round, I'll concede that much. But destroying the Pembertons and humiliating the Ashfords doesn't change the fundamental truth. Your husband's estate is still vulnerable, his influence still declining, and you remain the convenient scapegoat when everything collapses. The contracts you secured are temporary victories. I control the mining equipment market in the north. When your current leases expire in 18 months, you'll find renewal difficult, unless, of course, we come to an arrangement. I'll be in touch. Lord Pritchard Blackthorne read it twice, his expression turning progressively colder. He's threatening us, openly. He's desperate. Elara picked up the second letter, this one from the magistrate's office. She scanned it quickly, her pulse quickening. Listen to this. Following investigation into the Pemberton fraud case, evidence has emerged suggesting involvement by Lord Pritchard of Pritchard Industrial. His financial records show regular payments to a Mrs. Margaret Brennan, formerly employed at Blackthorne Hall. We request your cooperation in... They're investigating him. Blackthorne took the letter, reading more carefully. The magistrates found the connection. Mrs. Brennan must have kept records of payments. So we give them everything we have, the letters, the altered invoices, all of it. Elara felt a fierce satisfaction building. Let the legal system tear him apart. Legal proceedings take months, maybe years. And in the meantime, he's right. He does control the mining equipment market. If he blocks our access, the mines shut down. That's 40% of our income. Elara's mind raced. The same tactical thinking that had gotten them through the conspiracy's exposure now shifting to this new threat. Then we don't wait for legal proceedings. We make him irrelevant before he can block us. How? By changing the game entirely. He controls the market because no one else manufactures the equipment we need. What if we started making our own? Blackthorne stared at her. That would require massive capital investment, expertise we don't have, years to... Not if we partner with someone who already has the infrastructure, someone outside Pritchard's influence. She was thinking out loud now, pieces clicking together. The French manufacturer we met with, he mentioned expanding into England. What if we offered him exclusive contracts in exchange for establishing a manufacturing facility near our mines? We provide the location and guaranteed business. He provides the expertise and equipment. That's insane. That's strategy. She used his own word deliberately. Pritchard expects us to either capitulate or fight him in his territory. We do neither. We create new territory where he has no power. Blackthorne was quiet for a long moment, and Elara could see him working through the implications. Then slowly, that dangerous smile spread across his face. You want to start a manufacturing operation to spite one man. I want to eliminate a vulnerability and create sustainable independence. Spiting him is just a bonus. I'm starting to think I didn't trap you into this marriage. His eyes gleamed. You trapped yourself here deliberately just to turn my entire estate upside down. Too late for regrets now. They spent the next week in a whirlwind of meetings and negotiations. The French manufacturer, Monsieur Dubois, was enthusiastic about the proposal, especially when they showed him projections of the northern mining market's potential. Lady Catherine provided additional contacts and helped navigate the complex political landscape of establishing foreign manufacturing in England. But it was Elara who drove the negotiations forward, who identified which concessions mattered and which didn't, who convinced Dubois that betting on Blackthorne's future was betting on the right side. "You're quite formidable, Your Grace," Dubois said after they'd finalized terms. "When my associates warned me about dealing with the scandalous Duchess, I expected someone desperate and easy to manipulate. Instead, I find a woman who negotiates like she was born to it." "Desperation teaches you things," Elara said. "I'd rather not have learned them that way, but here we are." The manufacturing agreement was signed on a Wednesday afternoon. By Thursday morning, word had reached Lord Pritchard. He arrived at their townhouse unannounced, pushing past the butler with an arrogance that made Elara's hands clench. "You think you're clever," he said, without preamble, standing in their drawing room like he owned it. "Circumventing my equipment monopoly with a French partnership. But you're forgetting something crucial. I have friends in Parliament. I can make your little manufacturing venture's licensing so difficult it never gets off the ground." "You could try," Blackthorne said mildly, "but that would require explaining to Parliament why you're so opposed to English economic development and job creation. Difficult position during an election year." Pritchard's face flushed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Actually, we do." Elara stood, moving to stand beside Blackthorne. "We know you orchestrated a multi-year conspiracy to sabotage this estate. We know you paid Mrs. Brennan for information. We know you coordinated with the Pembertons and Ashfords. And we know the magistrates are currently building a case against you for fraud and criminal sabotage. So no, Lord Pritchard, you're the one who doesn't know what you're dealing with. Those charges will never stick. I have the best lawyers. You have expensive lawyers who will bleed you dry while your reputation collapses and your business partners distance themselves." Blackthorne's voice was cold steel. "We've already ensured that every major mining operation in the North knows about the investigation. They're reconsidering their equipment contracts with you as we speak. By the time this is over, you'll be lucky to have a business left to defend." Pritchard looked between them, and for the first time Elara saw genuine fear in his eyes. He'd expected them to fold, to negotiate from weakness. Instead, they'd outmaneuvered him at every turn. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Yes," Elara said quietly. "It is. You lost. Accept it with whatever dignity you have left." After he departed, escorted firmly by their butler, Elara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "Is it always going to be like this?" she asked. "Constantly fighting off people trying to destroy us?" "Probably. Power makes enemies." Blackthorne poured 2 glasses of brandy, handed her one. "But we're getting better at it. I'm tired of getting better at warfare. I want to actually build something." "Then build it." He sat across from her. "The manufacturing partnership is established. The estate is stable. What do you want to create that's yours?" That question again. What did she want beyond survival and revenge and proving herself? The answer came while reading morning correspondence 2 days later. A letter from one of the tenant farmers, thanking her for the new lease terms and mentioning how his daughter had shown aptitude for mathematics, but had no opportunity to study. Elara stared at that letter for a long time, an idea forming. She found Blackthorne in his study that afternoon. "I want to start a school." He looked up from his papers. "Explain." "A school for tenant children and estate workers' families. Real education, not just basic literacy. Mathematics, science, practical skills that give them actual opportunities." The words came faster as the vision clarified. "We have the space. That old grain storage building near the South Fields isn't being used. We have the resources from the new contracts. And we have children whose potential is being wasted because they have no access to education." That would be expensive and controversial. There are people who think educating the lower classes is dangerous. Let them think what they want. Those same people thought I was dangerous for confronting corruption. Elara leaned forward. "This is what I want to build, not just better lease terms or manufacturing partnerships. Actual paths for people to change their circumstances. The way mine were changed, but by choice instead of desperation." Blackthorne studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Do it. I'll allocate the funds. You design the program." The school project consumed her. Elara threw herself into planning curriculum, hiring teachers, converting the grain building into classrooms. She consulted with education reformers Lady Catherine connected her with, studied successful charity schools in London, and ignored the vocal criticism from conservatives who thought she was overstepping. The Duchess has gone too far this time, Lord Morrison, yet another Pemberton ally, was quoted in the papers. First, she disrupts agricultural tradition. Now she wants to educate people above their station. She's a menace to proper social order. Good, Elara said when Blackthorne showed her the article. If I'm not threatening the social order, I'm not trying hard enough. The school opened 4 months after the London gathering, on a crisp autumn morning. 23 children showed up that first day, nervous, excited, dressed in their best clothes. Elara stood in the doorway watching them file in and felt something shift in her chest. This was what power was supposed to be for. Your Grace? Anne appeared at her elbow, now officially her personal secretary rather than just her maid. The Tenants' Council is here for the quarterly meeting. Right. The other project she'd started, regular meetings with representatives from the tenant farms to discuss operations, problems, and improvements. Another innovation that had made traditionalists splutter about inappropriate familiarity with one's inferiors. Elara didn't care. The meetings had resulted in better yields, faster problem-solving, and actual functional communication between the estate management and the people who worked the land. The meeting went well. Discussions about winter preparations, equipment sharing agreements, plans for expanding the cover crop program. Elara took notes, asked questions, and watched Blackthorne do the same. He'd been skeptical of the tenant councils initially, but had grown to appreciate their practicality. We're doubling production on the western fields, one farmer reported. The new irrigation system is working better than expected. Excellent. What about the eastern section? Elara consulted her records. Last month you mentioned drainage issues. Solved, Your Grace. Used the method you suggested from that agricultural journal. Made all the difference. After the meeting, as farmers departed with promises to return next quarter, Blackthorne pulled Elara aside. You've transformed this estate in less than a year. You know that? We've transformed it. I couldn't have done any of this without your backing. I gave you resources. You did everything else. He was serious now, not deflecting. The school, the tenant councils, the manufacturing partnership, those are your vision, your work. I'm just smart enough to support it. Partnership, Elara insisted. We're partners. Yes, we are. He kissed her, soft and certain, which is why I need to show you something. He led her to his study, pulled out a document from his desk. This is my will, updated as of last week. In the event of my death, you inherit everything. The estate, the businesses, all of it. Full control, no trustees, no male relatives swooping in to manage things properly. Elara stared at the document. This is unprecedented. So is everything else we've done. I trust you to continue what we've built. That needs to be legally protected. His expression was vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen. You're not my dependent, Elara. You're my equal. This just makes it official. She couldn't speak, could only pull him close and hold on tight, overwhelmed by what that meant, the trust it represented, the future it acknowledged. Thank you, she finally managed. Thank you for not being the safe choice, for being the dangerous one instead. That evening, letters arrived from London. Lady Catherine had forwarded them. Responses to the agricultural papers Elara had been publishing about the Blackthorne reforms. 17 estate owners wanted to implement similar programs. 9 requested personal consultations. 4 offered partnerships on various agricultural innovations. You're becoming influential, Anne observed, organizing the correspondence. People are listening. Some people. Others still think I'm a disaster waiting to happen. Let them think what they want. The results speak for themselves. The results did speak. By winter, the school had 40 students. The tenant farms were showing record productivity. The manufacturing partnership with Dubois had created 30 new jobs, and the legal case against Lord Pritchard was progressing steadily, with Mrs. Brennan's testimony, purchased for a tidy sum and a guarantee of immunity, providing damning evidence. But victory, Elara was learning, never came without cost. The backlash arrived in the form of a coordinated editorial campaign. 3 major newspapers ran variations of the same story. The Dangerous Duchess, How Elara Blackthorne's Radical Reforms Threatened Traditional Society. The articles were vicious. They claimed her school was indoctrinating children with dangerous ideas. that her tenant reforms would collapse within a year, leaving farmers worse off than before, that she was manipulating her husband, using feminine wiles to push through changes that would ultimately destroy the duchy. Feminine wiles? Elara read aloud, incredulous. They think I seduced my way into agricultural reform. To be fair, Blackthorne said, reading over her shoulder, you are quite seductive, though I don't recall that being your primary negotiating tactic. This isn't funny. They're trying to destroy everything we've built by making me seem like some kind of manipulative schemer. They're trying. They won't succeed. He took the newspapers, tossed them aside. The numbers don't lie. The farms are more productive. The school is functioning. The manufacturing partnership is creating jobs. Facts beat narrative eventually. Eventually isn't soon enough if they convince people to oppose us before the facts become undeniable. Then we make them undeniable faster. Blackthorne pulled out fresh paper. We publish our own accounting, full financial records showing the estate's improvement, student outcomes from the school, testimony from tenants about how the reforms helped them. We fight editorial opinion with documented reality. They spent the next week compiling evidence. Elara worked with the school teachers to document student progress, surveyed tenant farmers about income changes, gathered production data from every corner of the estate. The report they published was comprehensive, detailed, and utterly factual. No emotional appeals, no defensive posturing, just numbers showing irrefutably that the Blackthorne reforms worked. The response was swift. Some newspapers apologized for their previous coverage. Others doubled down, claiming the numbers were fabricated. But slowly, grudgingly, the narrative began to shift. Look at this. Anne showed Elara an editorial from the Manchester Observer. They're calling you a visionary willing to challenge ossified tradition. That's practically a love letter compared to last week. I'll take grudging respect over active hatred. Elara filed the clipping. Though I'd prefer they focus on the results rather than making me personally into some symbol. But that, she was learning, was inevitable. She'd become something beyond just herself, a representation of change, of women wielding power unconventionally, of challenging systems everyone assumed were unchangeable. It was exhausting, thrilling, terrifying. The final confrontation with Lord Pritchard came not in a courtroom, but at a parliamentary hearing on industrial practices. Elara attended with Blackthorne, watching from the gallery as Pritchard defended himself against charges of fraudulent business practices. He was eloquent, forceful, playing the wrong gentleman being persecuted by upstart newcomers. Then, the prosecutor called Mrs. Brennan to testify. The former housekeeper looked older, harder, completely unintimidated by the parliamentary chamber. She laid out everything in clinical detail. The payments from Pritchard, the information she'd provided, the instructions she'd received to sabotage estate operations. And why did you agree to this arrangement? The prosecutor asked. Money. Security. The promise of a comfortable retirement if I helped bring down the duchy. Mrs. Brennan's voice was flat. I didn't care about Lord Pritchard's larger goals. I just wanted to be paid. Did you feel any remorse about betraying your employer? No. The Duke never appreciated my service anyway. His mother did, but after she died, I was just there, invisible. Lord Pritchard made me feel valuable. She finally showed emotion, bitterness that cut like glass. That was worth more than loyalty to people who barely noticed I existed. The testimony was damning. More importantly, it was believable. Mrs. Brennan wasn't performing repentance or making excuses. She was simply stating facts. Pritchard's defense crumbled. Without being able to discredit Mrs. Brennan's testimony, without being able to dismiss the documented evidence, he had nothing. The parliamentary committee recommended criminal prosecution. His business licenses were suspended pending investigation. His social standing evaporated overnight. Elara watched him leave the chamber, a powerful man reduced to just another defendant facing ruin. She felt no triumph, just tired satisfaction that it was finally over. How do you feel? Blackthorne asked as they departed. Empty, relieved, ready to never think about Lord Pritchard again. She took his arm. Let's go home. The real home, not London. I want to see how the winter wheat is coming in. They returned to Blackthorne Hall 3 days later, and Elara felt the tension she'd been carrying for months finally release. This place had been a prison when she'd first arrived. Now it was where she'd built something real. The estate was thriving. The winter wheat looked promising. The school had added a second teacher to handle growing enrollment. The tenant farms were preparing for spring planting with actual optimism instead of grim endurance. Your Grace? One of the farmers, Henderson, father of 5, stopped her during a tour of the fields. I wanted to thank you. My eldest, she's at your school now, learning mathematics. Says she could become a teacher herself someday. She's bright. She absolutely could. Because of you. You gave her that chance. His eyes were bright with emotion. You gave all our children chances we never had. That's everything, Your Grace. After he left, Elara stood in the winter field surrounded by dormant earth that would bloom again come spring and let herself feel it. The weight of what they'd built. The lives actually changed. The future opening up for children who'd been born into limited options. This was power, not just wielding authority, but using it to create possibility. That evening, there was a modest celebration at the hall. Tenant representatives, household staff, teachers from the school. Nothing elaborate, just people gathering to mark the year's successes. Elara stood watching them, these people who'd become more than just employees or tenants. They'd become collaborators in building something better. Quite a difference from the gathering where you threw out Caroline Ashford, Lady Catherine observed, appearing at Elara's elbow. She'd traveled from London specifically for this celebration. That was theater. This is real. This is what matters. Elara accepted a glass of wine from a passing servant. The London performance was necessary, but this, she gestured at the assembled people. This is what I actually care about. You've accomplished something remarkable, you know. Not just surviving scandal or rebuilding reputation. You've actually changed how an entire estate operates, given people agency in their own lives. Lady Catherine's smile was proud. I sponsored you because I thought you'd be interesting. I didn't expect you'd be important. I'm not. You are, whether you like it or not. Other estates are watching. Other women are watching. You've proven that being unconventional doesn't mean being incompetent. That's powerful. Blackthorne found Elara later, on the terrace overlooking the grounds. Stars spread overhead, winter bright and infinite. Hiding from your own party? Thinking. She leaned into him when he wrapped an arm around her. A year ago, I was standing at an altar, abandoned and humiliated. If someone had told me then that a year later I'd be here, married to you, running an estate, starting a school, actually happy, I'd never have believed them. Would you go back? If you could undo everything, the abandonment, the forced marriage, all of it, would you? Elara considered it seriously. The pain of that altar had been real. The fear and uncertainty of those first months at Blackthorne Hall had been genuinely horrible. But they'd also forged her into someone stronger, someone capable, someone who mattered. No, she said finally. I wouldn't go back. That version of me was waiting for life to happen to her. This version makes it happen. Good answer. He kissed the top of her head. Though, for the record, I'm grateful Marcus Ashford was a gambling addict and a coward. If he'd actually married you, I'd never have had the chance to trap you into this partnership. You didn't trap me. I walked in willingly. After I manipulated circumstances to make you desperate enough to accept. Details. She smiled up at him. We're here now. That's what matters. 6 months later, Elara stood before a packed auditorium in London, delivering a lecture on sustainable estate management to an audience that included landowners, economists, and government officials. The woman who'd been abandoned at the altar was now invited to speak at the Royal Society. The scandal had become a success story. The blame had transformed into authority. The traditional extraction model, she explained, showing her carefully prepared charts, assumes that maximizing short-term profit is the goal. But this creates unstable systems dependent on exploiting labor and depleting resources. The Blackthorne model proves there's a better way. Investing in the people who work your land creates sustainable long-term growth that benefits everyone. Questions came from the audience, skeptical, curious, genuinely interested. Elara answered them all with the confidence of someone who'd spent 18 months proving these theories worked in practice. After the lecture, several estate owners approached her about consultation contracts. A government minister asked about implementing similar programs on Crown lands. A publisher offered a book contract. You're in demand, Blackthorne observed that evening. How does it feel? Surreal. A year and a half ago, these same people were gossiping about my humiliation. Now they want my advice. Because you proved them wrong, thoroughly and repeatedly. He pulled her close. You've become exactly what I needed. A partner who makes me better rather than just more comfortable. Is that your idea of a romantic compliment? It's the truth. Romance is easy. Partnership is rare. Elara laughed, because he was right. They'd built something far more valuable than romance. They'd built trust, respect, and shared purpose. That was worth more than any fairy tale. 2 years after her abandonment, Elara received an unexpected letter. Your Grace, I write with news I thought you should hear personally. Lord Pritchard died in prison yesterday. Heart failure, though I suspect shame contributed. His estate has been liquidated to pay his debts and legal fees. His family is ruined. The conspiracy you exposed ended several lives and destroyed many more. I hope this brings you closure. Magistrate William Thornberry. Elara read the letter twice, waiting to feel something. Satisfaction, victory, relief. Instead, she just felt tired. Pritchard is dead, she told Blackthorne, handing him the letter. He read it, expression unreadable. Good. He deserved worse. Maybe. But I can't bring myself to celebrate someone's death, even someone who tried to destroy us. You're more generous than me. I'm just tired of the past. I'd rather focus on what we're building. She moved to the window of her study, formerly Mrs. Brennan's office, now thoroughly transformed into a space for planning, creating, improving. Speaking of which, I had a thought about expanding the school program. They spent the rest of the evening discussing education initiatives, agricultural innovations, and plans for the future. The past, with all its humiliation and conspiracy and pain, felt distant, relevant only as context for how far they'd come. The present was what mattered. The future was what they were building. 3 years after standing at that altar alone, Elara stood at a different altar, the small chapel on the estate grounds, surrounded by tenant families and household staff, and the people who'd become her community. This time, she wore a simple dress instead of elaborate wedding silk. This time, there were no society nobles judging her worth. This time, it was just her and Blackthorne, renewing vows that had started as a transaction and become something real. I didn't think I'd ever willingly stand in a chapel again, she said, when it was her turn to speak. The first time broke something in me I thought couldn't be fixed, but you. She looked at Blackthorne, this man who'd trapped her and freed her in the same gesture. You showed me that broken things can be rebuilt stronger, that survival can become success, that the worst day of my life was actually the beginning of the best years. That's setting the bar pretty high for the rest of our marriage, he said, and the chapel laughed. You've never been one for low bars. She took his hands. So here's my promise. I'll keep building with you, keep fighting beside you, keep being the dangerous woman you needed when you made that calculated decision to marry me. And here's mine. I'll keep backing every impossible idea you have. Keep believing you can change things everyone else accepts as unchangeable. Keep being grateful that Marcus Ashford was too stupid to show up that day. He squeezed her hands. Because you're the best thing that ever happened to me, even if it started with me manipulating you into desperation. Especially because of that, Elara corrected. Comfortable choices don't create change. Desperate ones do. After the simple ceremony, there was a celebration that lasted into evening. Food from the estate's kitchens, music from local musicians, dancing on the lawn as stars emerged overhead. Elara danced with tenant farmers and household staff, with Anne, who'd become a trusted friend, with Lady Catherine, who'd taken a gamble on an abandoned bride and won spectacularly, and with Blackthorne, who held her close and whispered, "Thank you." For what? For not giving up, for being stronger than anyone expected, for building an empire from ruins. We built it together. We did, but you made it possible. He kissed her as the music swelled around them. The woman who supposedly ruined a duke actually saved him. Elara smiled against his lips. That's one version of the story. What's yours? The woman everyone blamed for decline became the reason for success. The victim became powerful. The ending everyone expected, failure, humiliation, ruin, never came. Instead, she pulled back to look at him. Instead, something better happened. What's that? She fell forward instead of falling apart, and changed everything in the process. 5 years after her abandonment, Elara sat in the House of Lords gallery, watching Blackthorne present legislation on tenant rights and agricultural reform. Their work had grown beyond just the estate, had become a movement that others were joining, that government was finally taking seriously. The Duke who'd supposedly declined was now more influential than ever, his voice respected on economic reform. And sitting beside him as an equal was the Duchess who'd supposedly caused his fall, but had actually engineered his rise. "They're going to pass it," Lady Catherine murmured from the next seat. "Your reforms are about to become law." "Our reforms?" Elara corrected. "But yes, watching the votes tally in their favor, watching years of work become policy that would affect thousands of lives, that felt like victory. After the vote, there was celebration and congratulation, and 100 people wanting to claim credit for what had been accomplished." Elara slipped away from the crowds, finding a quiet corridor where she could breathe. Blackthorne found her there, as he always did. "You should be in there accepting praise. This was your vision." "I'm tired of praise. I just wanted it to work." She leaned against him. "Is it strange that now that we've won, I almost miss the fighting?" "Not strange. You're built for challenges." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "So what's next? What impossible thing are we tackling now?" Elara thought about the letters on her desk, requests from other duchesses wanting to learn her methods, invitations to speak at universities, proposals for expanding the school program nationwide. "Everything," she said. "We tackle everything." And they did. For years after, the woman who'd been abandoned at the altar and the man who'd trapped her into marriage built something that lasted. Schools that gave opportunities to thousands of children. Agricultural reforms that improved countless lives. A partnership that proved power didn't require sacrificing decency. The story they told was simple. She was blamed for his decline, but became the reason for his resurgence. The truth was more complex. Two broken people had built something whole from their shattered pieces. Two desperate gambles had become one calculated empire. The woman who'd stood at that altar alone, humiliated and abandoned, never could have imagined where she'd end up. But standing beside Blackthorne years later, watching the sun set over lands they'd transformed together, Elara was grateful. Grateful for the abandonment that freed her from a smaller life. Grateful for the forced marriage that became a real partnership. Grateful for every challenge that proved her stronger than anyone expected. The world had tried to define her as ruin, as the woman who destroyed a duke. Instead, she'd become the woman who rebuilt an empire. And that, Elara thought, was a far better story.